all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast. I'm your host, Dean, joined by my co-host. I couldn't come up with a rhyme this week, David. David, how are you doing?
You couldn't even set me up for like the Halloween stinger, dude.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Special
I choked.
It's okay.
I don't know. You got a good setup rhyme thing?
I don't know. No, I'm not as clever as you, so maybe I shouldn't even be criticizing. But this is going to be a killer episode, everybody. That's the best I can do.
Oh, God, the puns, they hurt.
Yeah.
All right. So, speaking of killer episodes, so last week we had a bit of a low point, you'd say. Some pretty lackluster slashers.
Yeah, it's a little taste test of what's to come, but you wanted more because you were not satisfied.
We were not. And what do we have this week, Mr. David?
Well, this week we're doing the two, probably some of the most iconic slashers to ever grace the screen.
Probably the best of the business.
We got Psycho, and we have Halloween to start our lovely little October horror movie month.
And this is not no remakes of either. We have the originals. We have Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and we have John Carpenter's Halloween.
Yes, for better.
Could you imagine if we did Rob Zombie's Halloween?
No, I cannot imagine if we did one of like the Psycho sequels.
Oh God, that's right. For those who don't know, is there four?
I think
four
there's
Psychos?
Four, and I don't really want to ever touch that because it's just one of those things. It's like when can't remember what movie it is, but somebody had to like make a sequel to one of Kubrick's films. It's all
2010?
all the Odyssey films. Yeah, and it's like how do you approach one of like the greatest with Hitchcock and make a sequel to his work? It's like you can't do that.
Was it Gus Van Sant just made a shot-for-shot remake of a Psycho? That's what he did. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
So there's a remake of Psycho from 90 something. It has Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, and it's more or less a shot-for-shot remake. Not exactly. There's a few things that are different, but it's basically a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho.
Could work.
No,
maybe not. No. Okay. Well,
it's a pretty big yikes from me.
Listen, let's stop teasing these people, keeping them on their toes, their hair standing on end. Let's get right into these log lines.
So, what is Psycho about? What's the short and sweet of it?
A lovesick secretary stays the night at a grim roadside motel after she flees across state lines to pay the debts of her lover. Halloween is about a left-out babysitter fights for her life when an escaped killer hunts down her half-naked friends.
There are, in fact, a lot of half-naked friends in Halloween.
A lot of nudity you should not be seeing, but for some reason they were like, yeah, I don't know, dude. It's alright.
It's 70s. So, with that, which would we like to start off first with?
That's a good question. I feel like in the spirit of the month, and the spirit of the theme of this month, let's do the namesake. Let's go with Halloween.
Halloween. All right. So, David, I'm going to go out on a wild guess and say you've seen Halloween before this, maybe once or twice.
I'm going to make you go even wilder and admit I have not seen either of these movies all the way through. I've caught both on TV, like in halves. I've seen the last half of Halloween on TV. I've seen the first half of Psycho on TV. These kinds of things, but I've never watched either all the way through. Yeah.
I'm legitimately shocked. How? Really? You've never seen either of these all the way through?
Listen, this is the thing. I'm the scariest film student / nerd out there who hasn't seen anything. So,
Oh my God. Okay, well.
I spent all my time watching a bunch of Netflix indie films.
Yikes. Okay, well, I've seen Halloween a lot. A whole hell of a lot. I've probably seen it I don't know, 30 times since I first saw it when I was like 10 or 11.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be pretty scary to see this
Yeah.
movie 30 times.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I watch it like every Halloween, and I probably like once or twice other than that throughout the year. So it's not like a thing where I watch it 30 times in a row. It's, I've seen it pretty
Sure. Yeah.
a lot. Psycho I've probably seen a half dozen times. But I'll I digress. I've seen these a lot, and I very much enjoy both of them.
Yeah.
So let's get the broad overview here. What's going on? What do we like? What do we don't like? Let's get into the film a little bit.
Right. So the film opens on the very iconic, and this is actually my favorite bit of the movie, the very iconic scene in which we are POV on somebody snooping around outside the Myers household, and we come to
Oh,
find after a gruesome stabbing that it is little old Michael Myers, all 6 years old and probably no more than 4 feet tall in a clown costume, who has just
this opening is
yeah.
fantastic.
It really is one of the most iconic horror movie openings ever, if not the most famous one.
The crazy thing about this opening, this was actually so John Carpenter when he made this movie when he's writing the script,
Hmm.
one of his favorite horror films or films that he'd seen recently was Black Christmas, and this was actually a homage to Black Christmas.
Yes, yes, I do remember reading about that.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like he did the whole setup and the bait and switch where we see it's young Michael. He's like this really young kid, and it's like very shocking where you see him and it's this little blonde kid. And something else that's kind of weird about this opening is so Judith and her boyfriend, they're getting hot and heavy, and then they go up to go up to her room, and it doesn't cut, and then her boyfriend just kind of leaves,
Yeah.
and he's only up there for like a minute. Did they just like plow in a minute flat, and he was like, okay, I'm done?
Well, as
I'm
we'll
a
learn later in the movie, it seems as though Carpenter was very well aware that teenagers can't last for hours in bed, because there is one sex scene later in the movie that literally lasts all of about 10 seconds. But for
these
some reason has as much passion and vigor as a Fabio romantic novel. It's interesting.
very interesting indeed. There's something about premature ejaculation that is a theme in this film.
Yeah, emphasis on the premature.
Indeed.
Yeah,
So
and the other thing I thought interesting was about this scene, because I have to mention it, otherwise it's going to drive me crazy, is what's up with Michael's parents, dude? I
what do
mean,
you mean?
okay, you're watching the scene, right?
Yeah.
It's very well constructed. Technically, you couldn't have done it any better way with the POV and the killing, and you're in the eyes of the killer.
The mask goes on, it gets you in his mind, in his footsteps.
Yeah, you come back down, you reveal that the kid, the 6-year-old, murdered this teenager, and
And
his
it's not even
parents are
it's his
about
sister.
the
And
parents could be like the least interested people in the fact that this has just occurred. There's a cursory Michael, and then the mom is literally standing there like, so are we gonna go inside? It's kind of cold out right now.
and Michael's standing there with the bloody knife and he's
Yeah.
holding it up and
I don't know, and that long like track, or it's like a crane shot away from them. It's just a little. It's just too. What's going on?
you're really confused as to why are the parents just standing completely still for the crane shot.
Yeah, but I think this actually sets the tone in what will become of the film perfectly, because this film is very well thought out and also not very well thought out at the same time.
And that's John Carpenter's like style. It's like the
Yeah,
film is like watertight in some places, and the in some other places you can kind of just drive a boat through it, but you're in it.
yeah.
It's good. I love John Carpenter movies. Like the guy's superb.
Wonderful. I mean, he is a genius in his own right, an auteur, if you could say so, of more commercial style films.
That's gonna be weird when we get to the end, and because we're gonna have to talk about Carpenter versus Hitchcock at the end of this, and that's gonna be interesting.
Yeah,
The king of the genre films and the master of suspense.
but credit to Carpenter for this opening scene. We then move from there On to 15 years later, little old Michael
1978.
has grown from this sweet little 4-year-old boy into this. We could call him an NFL linebacker
He's
on
pretty big.
steroids. Like
He's pretty big.
he's a strong man, Michael Myers now. He's being transported by our
Well, he's
one of our
about to get
or
transported
or
by
yeah, he's
Dr.
about to be
Loomis.
picked up from the hospital for a transfer by one of our kind of quote unquote main characters because this is who we start following the story with, Dr. Samuel Loomis,
Which played by Donald Pleasance perfectly.
right?
He was not even the first choice, not even the second choice. He was the third choice for this role, and he kills it.
He certainly kills something. Um,
What, you don't like creepy Donald Pleasance as Doc Loomis?
I just think, okay, and I'm gonna say this now because it's gonna come up a few times, and I get it. This movie is supposed to. I've read up on it a little bit, and I get that Carpenter was trying to make both a horror movie that particularly he would have been scared by as a 6-year-old, so that makes sense, and
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of them are inspired by literally just babysitter slashers, so it makes sense. But some of the directing in this movie is particularly off for me. I don't know.
What do you
And there are just certain moments that seem a little only a horror movie could do this.
what do you mean? Give me an example. Are you talking about like this scene in particular?
Yeah, there was actually a moment at the ending of the scene. Obviously, his colleague Marion Chambers is the name of the character. Is supposed to be watching the car, and Michael comes jumping over the fence of the mental institution with all of his superhuman strength. Wrestles her out of the car, almost kills her before
Yeah.
Loomis comes running. And then this is the moment I'm talking about. They're kind of standing on the side of the road as the car is sped off in the rain, just like staring off into the distance, a little too long. And it's just like, why isn't anything else happening? That's what I mean. There's just a lot of like, let's hold on this. Let's hold on this. We're going to keep holding on it. For what? I'm not really sure.
For the suspense, for the tension.
Yeah, and
There's
I get it. It's an hour and a half barely with skin and bones, so I get that they're probably trying to fill some stuff, but you know, it's just interesting.
I guess, but I'm just saying, Donald Pleasance is fantastic in this movie, and you can't change my mind.
Yeah, I mean, listen, on a non how would I put it, non-academic sense, I do like this movie because it's so fun, and you get a lot of fun out of watching this movie. But it's just interesting. Otherwise,
We'll get to the hoity-toity, high-minded stuff.
I
Don't
wasn't. Yeah,
worry.
listen, you weren't going to expect me to come into this citing this as one of the congressional Medal of Honor films that we should be storing in the U.S. Library or whatever it is.
The Library of Congress,
Yeah,
which it
whatever.
is.
But yeah, but we'll get to that, like you said.
All right.
Moving along,
Moving
Michael
along.
has committed Grand Theft Auto and is on his way. Life is a highway for him, and he's on his way back to his hometown to go back home to his house, which was condemned,
It's
looking
in
like it
head.
was burnt down at some point. But
I don't know, but because we see it after, like, Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, the original Scream Queen, shows up and she's going to drop the keys off at the old Myers house or whatever, because I guess
Right.
her dad's trying to sell it. And when we finally see the house, it looks abandoned. So good on the prop department and all that, or I guess the location scouts in that, where they
Sure,
actually
yeah.
found an abandoned house. I actually looked it up. It was a legitimately abandoned house that had been abandoned for like 10 years. And when we see it in the beginning, it's the same house. They just had to dress it up to make it look not abandoned.
Yeah, movie magic.
Movie magic. But yeah, and it's kind of interesting because Laura drops off the keys, she leaves, and then that's when we see Michael for the first time. He like peeks his head into frame and he sees Laurie walking away.
Yeah.
And is that the whole reason why he wants to kill her? Because she got on his lawn?
A little bit. this is another moment in which, while I enjoy the shot, I do the whole over the shoulder. Over the shoulder was fairly a new kind of technique in the we'd probably say late 60s is where it started to show up, and then 70s is where that new style of movie making that had moved away from like television set style to like this we're on location style movie making.
Hmm.
And that shot in particular is probably good for a horror film of that time because it's like we're getting a lot closer to the killer at this point. But again, it holds a little long, and then
Here's
also it kind of loses. I love the point you make because it's like, yeah, it makes sense that he sees her dropping out the keys. He's probably trying to get out because he knows the house is going to be sold, and he wants to stay possessive of it. But then I lose that once I'm still sitting there going like, okay, does nobody in broad daylight see this crazy guy in a jumpsuit just staring at this? I have a
teenager.
lot to say about the neighbors of Jamie Lee Curtis in this movie because I think this is a terrible neighborhood.
Oh
The
yeah,
homeowners
we're gonna get
association
into
should
that.
really have a meeting in this neighborhood.
Uh, but yeah, like honestly, I like it for like because I think that that works where he holds a long time because we're holding a long time with it's Michael, it's an over the shoulder. Laura's walking away and she's singing her little love
Yeah,
song kind of absent mindedly, and I like that it holds so long because it's
it's
just like
unsettling. Yeah,
yeah, that's the thing. I think that's what this movie does a lot with those long shots is it's trying to give you a sense of unsettling. It's like when are we gonna cut? Is something gonna happen? And then when it finally does, it's like that release of tension kind of thing.
true.
But
Yeah.
as it goes on,
As it goes on, our lovely little main character, in proper Laurie Strode, is just a regular old high school girl. She has her friends and their concerns of everyday teenager life, such as boys and sex and smoking and all of these things that we love until a killer comes into our life.
yep.
Um, it kind of mills about for a bit. Lori kind of feels like there's something peeking over her shoulder after spooking the kids at the Myers house. Um,
We do get some introductions to some of the adults in the movie, namely when so Lori and her friend Andy they go driving. They're smoking some weed as they're driving around town,
yeah,
and Lori's telling him, "Oh, we have to babysit tonight." Blah blah blah. Blah. And they run into the Andy's dad, the sheriff, and he is like just so nonchalant, being like, "Hey, don't worry. Somebody just robbed the hardware store, stole some masks, some knives, some ropes. Just some kids having some fun."
yeah. That
And
was another thing. This is again a part where I'm like,
so they stole a murder kit, is
yeah,
what you're
it's kind
telling
of
me,
it,
officer?
it glosses over certain things. They stole, they stole a mask, knives, rope, chloroform, gasoline can, gasoline, a
A
ball
couple
gag,
rounds.
some chain, a bike lock, a shovel. It just like at what point do you sit there and go, it's concerning what they saw.
Right, because that's something that's kind of interesting about this movie because there's some characters that just seem to be so nonchalant about this.
Yeah,
Because I think a scene or two before this, Dr. Loomis is talking to the head of the hospital, and the head of the hospital is like, "Don't worry, he's like, we're gonna find him. We set up a couple of roadblocks. There's an all points bulletin out. We're gonna find him. It's fine. He doesn't even know how to drive a car." And Dr. Loomis points out, "Well, he was driving pretty well last night. Also, he's a convicted fucking killer, and he's absolutely psycho. He hasn't said a word to anybody in 10 fucking years.
yeah.
He's this fucking 6 foot whatever, built like a linebacker monster, and he just doesn't seem to care."
Yeah, I think you're referencing the phone booth scene, if I'm correct, right, where they're on the side of
I
the highway.
believe so, yeah.
That was a good.
Also,
That was a good scene. I did like that.
and that's another thing. So Dr. Loomis he stops in the phone booth, and then when he leaves, he goes and he finds out it's like, oh, this must have been the where Michael got his jumpsuit, and there's a dead body in the bushes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, like you literal serial killer on the loose,
Yeah,
people.
is this not getting any more concerning for anybody? I mean, like, I don't know. But I guess to suspend our disbelief.
Yeah, because
I
it
get
is
it.
a pretty easy suspend, I
Yeah, it's
guess.
small town. It's supposed to. It's kind of weird. It teeters on like small town America and suburbia California. That's kind of how it feels.
Well, because that's the thing. It's supposed to be set in Haddonfield, Illinois, which is supposed to be small town America,
Yeah,
but it's filmed in Pasadena, California.
and it's very apparent that that suburbia is Pasadena. I mean, all of those houses
Yeah.
are like premier colonial, you know, stone arch houses. It's very
It's weird
yeah.
because all the house, because it's supposed to be in like late October. All the trees are bright, lush green. It doesn't look like it's cold at all. And it's really funny because they
The
could have
wind
just
is
said it
about
was in
all.
California.
Yeah, the
Hmm?
wind is about all that really gives away that it might be fall. Which
Yeah.
that was I was like, fine, I get it. You're not supposed to paint all the leaves orange or whatever, but and it's not always that we get like clear cut fall looking trees.
And
Um,
granted, that one's a little nitpicky, I guess, because if you're not looking at it, you kind of don't notice.
yeah, I was gonna say I didn't really notice that bit because I was too focused on the fact that the adults in this movie are incompetent. But
Well, the kids aren't doing much better.
no, the
We'll get
kids are
all to
also
that.
there. The apple does not fall far from the tree in Illinois, but
And I think with that let's get into Act Two here, because
yeah,
that's
starting to get into the hunt a little bit. The scariness is coming back into the story, and um, Lori
Lori
is
and Annie going to the kid's house to babysit.
yeah right across the
Michael's on the
street.
prowl.
Um, her friend Lindsay Wallace is across the street babysitting a little girl, and that's where Michael decides to visit first. There's a few little tense scenes in which Lindsay is in the detached washing room, and Michael's milling around in the bushes trying to find some berries or whatever, and uh, Lindsay's getting stuck and calling for help, and there's all this stuff,
Well,
and
Annie's the one who's getting stuck. Lindsay's the little girl she's babysitting.
oh, well,
Did you not?
everybody's
Yeah.
white in this movie. Who knows?
Wow. Wow. Yeah. All white people look alike.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. Yeah.
you know, I mean,
So, but yeah, Annie's getting also. So I almost forgot. This is a thing that kind of weirded me out a little bit. So Annie is babysitting Lindsay, and she wants to go, do with her boyfriend Bob. No, not Bob. Paul. Yeah,
no,
and
yeah,
Paul's
yeah,
grounded.
Paul.
Yeah,
You see what I
Paul.
mean? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, we're getting. Don't worry, don't worry. But so Paul's grounded, and she's like, whatever, waiting around. She's making popcorn, and she spills like butter on her clothes,
Something like
and
that.
then
Yeah.
she just decides to strip down to only her panties in the middle of the kitchen, and just puts on I guess the dad's shirt.
Something like that, yeah. And obviously like the girls in the next room, whatever. But it's like, and then she's also technically underage, so it's just like two kids in a house together. It's not really. But
Well,
this
here's
brings
the
up the
thing,
first bit
because
of the interesting bit for me, right?
well, I just want to put this here before we go. So what if the mom comes home or whatever? She's like, oh, I forgot my keys, and she just sees Annie there, and the dad's button up white shirt just on the couch in her panties.
Well, that would be
How
an
does that
interesting
end?
concern, Dean, but that also is not ever going to happen because, again, the adults are incompetent, and for some reason, these parents have decided to stay out on Halloween night until like 5 a.m.
Yeah, that's also kind of weird. Cause so my guess is that it's probably 8 o'clock when Annie and Lori or whatever they're in the babysitting house, right?
Yeah.
Or 7 is probably when they show up, and then this all takes place over the course of what, 3 hours, give or take.
Well, let's see. The kids finish at least a few movies and the
I
carving of a jack o' lantern. I'd give it at least 3 or 4, maybe even 5 hours.
Okay, well, so we'll say this takes place from 8 to midnight. That's the span of this movie when it gets going.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so eight to midnight. And the kids, they're, as we said, they're watching movies, jack-o'-lanterns. Annie's getting, she Paul calls and she's excited she's gonna go get herself some, so she dumps Lindsay off with Lori and Tommy, and Annie gets gotten a great scene, but with all this going on, actually, yeah, where the fuck are the parents? I just realized that because we don't see them ever come home.
Never
Did they
come
just
home. They're
did
never
they abandon the
called.
kids?
They could. I mean, I would abandon these kids.
Really?
I mean, they're
Oh,
not
come
really that
on.
useful.
They're just, yeah, they're kids. They're like 10.
Yeah, but it's like he keeps calling it the boogeyman. It's like I feel like at 10 years old, I would have the wherewithal to recognize that guy's a little scarier and a little more real than the boogeyman. But
Look, give
it's
it whatever.
1978. I get it. These kids are probably a little bit more childish than we grew
They're
up
not
as.
as jaded
Yeah,
as you were at 10.
you know, it's a much different landscape. Late 70s America versus post 9/11 America. But
Yeah.
uh, that all that aside, I do again love the killing scenes in this movie. I will admit this because I love the way that the guy who plays Michael moves.
Yes.
He's stiff, he's erratic, he's all his movement you could like feel the impact of his body. Especially him as we love in this I think up until this point they've used the delayed gratification of scare very well.
Hmm.
And then this moment where he finally like rises from the back seat like with a drop of a pin.
We have to talk about Annie's death scene in total because it is so good.
Yeah.
Because Annie, she goes into the garage, she tries to open up the car, but she forgot the keys. So she goes back in the house, grabs the keys, and she's singing this nice little like love song or whatever. She's kind of absent-minded. Gets the keys, goes back. She opens up the car door, gets in, but she didn't unlock the car door. It
Right.
just was open when she got back in. And it takes her a second to realize, like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And then, boom, Michael jumps out of the back seat and strangles her to death. And I think that gives credit to the sound design in that scene because she's gasping for air. He has that weird, heavy breathing under the mask thing going on, the struggle, the sound of the horn. And it's just really unnerving how that scene plays out. I don't know. Is it just me?
I think what I noticed is that this movie, I mean, obviously because of the way that we talked about it was produced, is inspired rather than thought up and then written. It being inspired by Babysitter Slashers and Black Christmas and Carpenter trying to do sort of combine that with these haunted house stories to make it work. I kind of feel like the story was structured around these tentpole scenes of the kills, which it's a horror movie that makes sense,
Mm.
and then that's why we get a lot of this like filler that's not totally great. It doesn't always like satisfy in between those killing scenes.
The
Um,
like the tension scenes kind of thing.
yeah, and then
Where it's
once we
Michael
actually get
watching, observing, and following kind of thing.
yeah, once we get back to the bread and butter of the movie, that's where they were well thought out because that's why they're making the movie, which is I think ultimately a good thing. I mean, why are you going to watch a scary movie if it doesn't have good scares in it? And this is definitely a good one because the other thing I love about slasher films in general, but this one in particular, is that while there's a little bit of that like horror movie mystic kind of voodoo magic going on where it's like ooh spooky, it's still very physical, it's still
Mm.
very present, it's still very this guy could escape and come to your town.
Mm. My thing here is that Michael is killing these people, but I think the reason I like this horror movie so much is because the characters like Annie, Lindsay, Lori, all them, they feel like realer characters. Like you like the characters in this
That's
movie. Like
true. I do think
which
that
is
there's
kind of lost on later slasher films, I
yeah,
guess.
I think there is a level to realism that this era of filmmaking, but then also this particular movie strives for out of the teenagers,
Hmm.
less so than the adults.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and I think I do. There were just a lot of like mannerisms that I did notice were very. I kind of at first tracked as cringy, but then as I watched it, I was like, well, they are teenagers. It kind of makes sense. the way they're
They're
acting,
teenagers.
and
It's 1970. Of course, they're gonna say totally all the time.
totally all the time they're gonna like constantly talk like overly moving their mouths. Uh, like do you notice that? Like, is it just me, or is like there's like a real, and it is set in the Midwest, so it kind of makes sense. Still, there's a real like real Hoosierness to the way they are. That's kind of,
Hoosierness.
yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's a weird thing I'm trying to describe, but
Are you just gonna insult all the Midwest? Because that sounds like a slur.
no, I guess it's
Bunch
not.
of
I don't
Hoosers.
have anything against it, but they definitely nail like the American suburban nuclear familyness of their mannerisms. Everything from like the whole, oh, I spilled some popcorn on my or butter on my shirt. I'm just gonna change out and wash the clothes real quick with the Tide, and then go back in. And Paul's gonna come over. We're gonna have a beer.
Basically, you're just like they just act like regular generic teenagers.
Yeah, not generic. I think there's a certain level to which that I feel like these teens exist at that
Yeah,
time, and to that, like, we're not silver screen teen kind of interaction.
I get you. I get you. They're very much like they feel more real than like insert like Friday the 13th characters on here.
Yeah, or even like, I mean, if we go back to that comment you made about modern horror films, it's like, give me a break, dude. I feel like people, when they try to strive for realism when creating characters now, there's no
Mhm.
point. Because, I mean, on top of the fact that stories are getting more and more complicated as we go along, so it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, your characters are going to be a little bit more unrealistic and imaginative every time. But I can't remember the last time I saw somebody on screen and was like, that's a real guy. That guy exists. Well, actually, there's one movie, and it's one of my favorite movies, but we're not going to get into that tangent right now.
look, bro, we've already gone too far. So all I'm saying is like I'll give you that current day like horror movies, slash movies, all that stuff. When because I know every horror movie now it's like, oh, we try to cast like real characters, unknown actors, stuff like that, blah 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 blah. And there was one where so guys making a horror movie. It's some like haunted house, whatever. I think you can find it on Netflix. I think it's called like American Poltergeist, American Horror Story,
Oh,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And he was like, I only wanted to cast girls, not supermodels, just solid everyday average girls. And you look at them, and I'm like, three of those ladies are Victoria's Secret models, sir. I don't. What are your standards where you're just like these three solid sevens? All right,
Yeah, it's like nothing against Blumhouse. I'm actually a huge fan of what they do, but look at any Blumhouse film nowadays, and it's like none of those people walk down the street and are normal people. They have pretty people problems, and they're stuck in pretty people land with pretty people killers.
right. You're like, can I just get the one survivor girl that's like a solid seven,
Yeah.
please?
And not to harp on it either, because I actually think that there's a level to which that commercialness is required in order to keep pumping out these movies. Again,
Yeah.
exactly why I give credit to Blumhouse. But that the Happy Death Day series is particularly one that I'll point out as being like, okay, you know what, dude? These people don't fucking exist.
Oh, I like Happy Death Day.
Yeah,
I
but it's
just I
like,
just reveal that I love bad movies, but I like Happy Death Day. That
it's
movie's
okay to like a
those
bad
two
movie.
movies are fun.
I'm not harping on that. It's just like I remember seeing the trailer for like the sequel to it, where it's like the girl gets stuck in it again or something like this.
Yeah, yeah. The
That
sequel's
character is,
weird.
it's just like, I don't know what I get it's for charisma's sake and for marketing. You want to market a pretty person so that they come to the movies to see the pretty person be cool on screen. Fair. Don't try and skate around the fact that that's what you're trying to do. We all know what that's you're trying to do, and some people like that, so it's great. Do it. It's just like, why am I always seeing trailers of like the leading lady? Nothing against leading ladies, but they're being quirky and funny on screen, and ha ha ha, I'm stuck in Death Day. Shit, I guess I gotta get out of this now, and it's supposed to be like this relatable thing. It's like, no, I don't
Are,
want this to be relatable on any
what are you
sense.
what are you I'm now confused as to what you're getting at. So is this David just doesn't like pretty people?
No, it's just like I'm tired of like the layer of shit that is over all of these trailers, in that they try to make it seem like these characters are just like you and me, and it's like, I know they're not, and I have no problem with that. I have a problem with you trying to continue to fool me and think I'm a clown for thinking
Oh,
I'm anywhere near these people.
I think I get what you're getting at. So this is every college movie.
Yeah,
Okay, for everybody out there, if you ever watched a movie like Van Wilder or Animal House, where you're just like, yeah, that's what college is. I'm like that guy, and I'm gonna be like that guy in college, and you're like, no, it's not. It's like that falsivity kind of
yeah.
thing where you're like, the person in the movie is like, yeah, this is, college, and this is who you're gonna be, and these are your characters, and you're gonna identify, and you're just like, bro, let's be real, no one's Van Wilder.
Yeah, let's be real. None of us are ever going to be Ryan Reynolds, and that's fine. You're the problem if you continue to think that you could be Ryan Reynolds. There's a reason he's there getting paid millions of dollars to look hot in these great movies, and you're over there working a minimum wage job and not moving up in the company because you continue to go home and do nothing with your life. Not
Jeez.
to harp on anybody who is like that listening to our show. We love you and appreciate your support. Listen to our go check out our sponsor today. But I don't know.
David's going hard on. David hates pretty people. That's what
I
I've learned
don't
from
know
this.
this. I continue to go back to. I have nothing wrong with the pretty people. Stop telling me I'm like the pretty people. We know there's a separation between the two.
And
It's
that's why
just
you like Halloween, because there's not a lot of pretty people.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not particularly infatuated. I shouldn't be because these are teens. But
If it helps, Jamie Lee Curtis is the only teenager in this movie, and she's like 19. If that helps your weird frustrations in this movie.
yeah, I'm just trying not to be like. I'm not trying
Creepy
to
David.
offhandedly call the high schoolers hot, but it's like. And maybe that's also because I was watching the movie with my girlfriend, and she made this one comment out of nowhere during like one of the later sex scenes. She's like, "Why are people in the '70s so ugly?" But you kind of notice
Um,
it. The further you go back in history, you kind of start to notice it's like there were no pretty people back then. There really weren't, or not a whole lot of them.
talent outweighed pretty, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. Uh, we're getting way off track here. But let's get back to the point.
Back to the point.
The
Back to the point. So
point,
Annie gets got.
yeah, Annie gets got, and we move along. For some reason, nobody hears the car horn in the garage going off
For like a couple minutes.
because I'd like to remind everybody that nobody moves the body unless Michael moves the body. Nobody moves the body, so that means Annie's head has been resting on the car horn through the duration of the end of the film, unless Michael has moved the body. And if he
No,
did,
Michael moved the
fine.
body. Michael moved the body. We got
It's
a
fine.
shot of that. Tommy sees him move the body and freaks out and says the boogeyman
Oh
did
yeah,
it.
that's true. That's
That
true.
happens.
So, but
Plot
even still,
slacked over.
none of the neighbors are concerned. You hear a car horn and you think, what the hell is that racket outside? But no, we're just not going to worry about it. Then also, nobody worries about seeing a man carrying a dead body across a front lawn that's very well lit. All these houses are extremely well lit from the outside, so fine. Nobody bats an eye at that.
It's Halloween. They could be thinking, okay, somebody got wasted in the garage and they're taking him inside.
Yeah, that was also something I thought about, is maybe there's a legitimate suspension of disbelief in that, he's wearing the Halloween mask and, he looks like he's... Because that's why I figured after a certain point I stopped getting annoyed with him just being able to walk around the neighborhood. And after a while I was like, oh, well, duh. Halloween. It's Halloween night. They probably just think this very large kindergartner is walking around in a Halloween costume.
It is kind of funny because, like, Michael does not look like a teenager.
No, not in the least bit.
Yeah, because he's built, which I believe Nick Castle, he's the stunt man, he's the person under the mask for the majority of the film. And he's a large dude.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing that that might be where you're getting your weird disbelief thing, where you're like, I don't think I could see a 6'4", 240-pound man wandering around a neighborhood in a jumpsuit and a knife
Yeah, don't get me
and not
wrong.
be concerned.
If you're trying to fool me about his age while he's committing identification fraud to attend Notre Dame and play on their defensive line, that's one thing. But again, this is just a guy walking around the neighborhood. I mean, at this point, you should be looking at that and being like, that's an adult in a Halloween costume, which did not happen in the 70s. Adults did not trick or treat. You would have been beaten up at school by the time you were 14 trick or treating or something like this,
Yeah, the only reason you dressed up was to get drunk with your friends at a Halloween party.
practically.
Yeah.
Which but ep- our traditional episode tangent of course, we have to disbelieve it because that's the way the story is. We
The
can't
movie
keep picking
works.
things apart. But
We're going to get into a lot more of these weird tangents in Psycho, don't worry.
yeah,
But
But
as it goes on,
as it
Dr.
goes
Loomis
on,
is hanging out outside of the Myers house and he's scaring off kids trying to go up and do, Bloody Mary in front of the door, something like that. He's scaring kids off from trying to get into the house.
that was pretty funny. I'll give you
Yeah,
that.
I like that how it seems like Loomis is in a totally different movie with the sheriff
Yeah,
than the rest of it. It's really good. He's scaring off the kids. Him and the sheriff like investigate the house, and he's like, "Okay, Michael's come back. There's a dead dog in the house. Shit's getting real." And while he's doing that, Bob and Linda show up to the Wallace's house where Annie just got murdered. And Bob and Linda are gonna go do the nasty inside the house. Which, on that note, these are Linda is the bad friend, right? Where they're like, "Oh, you're babysitting, awesome. I'm gonna go over to the house you're babysitting at and screw in the master bedroom. Keep a lookout."
screw in the master bedroom, steal your beer, smoke in the house, break and enter technically. um,
Yeah,
the
because
list
Bob
goes
just
on.
kicks down the front door, right?
Yeah. Oh, litter on your front lawn because beer cans pour out the van.
Yeah.
But drunk teenagers. What are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? It's the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay, so also this is another scene. So basically, Michael is in the house when Bob and Linda show up, and they start making out on the couch, and it goes in, and Michael just appears out of in the background. And he's watching them doing this, and they don't notice him. And okay, disbelief, they didn't notice him, but they're in that house long enough to have a full makeout session. Wait long enough to know, okay, wait long enough to know that Annie's not coming back, and decide, let's go outside and start fucking. Is Michael just in the kitchen making a sandwich?
Hmm.
Is he just, like, waiting in the shadows, just, man, this is kind of awkward.
Yeah, it is a little weird because it's like the implication inside the story logic, right, is that if he's still just sitting around watching them and waiting, it's very voyeuristic, and that's a little creepy. Because that doesn't come off as Michael's MO, although his whole thing is that I'm going to kill teens before they have sex, though unsuccessfully, because technically he kills them also after they have sex. But, it's the just slasher movie logic of if you have sex, you die. I kind of think what it is, and this is actually lining up with a lot of the ways that he operates throughout the movie, is he's just very predatory. It's very, very like primal predatory instinct for him to wait until they're separate and then strike and then make a show out of this whole,
Which
out of the kill.
I think that makes Michael more scary because he
Oh,
acts more like an
absolutely.
animal than a person.
Yeah. There is something deeply psychological to the character of Michael Myers that is just simple enough for it to work, and then is also just deep enough for it to really kind of drive the rest of the character.
Yeah. But as we go on, so they're in there and they're doing the do,
Yeah. Well,
and
they've done the do, I think,
they
up to this point after a
yeah,
very short,
weird like 3 pumps and done session,
yeah,
I
which
guess.
of which they both find absolute peaks of pleasure in, which is another thing I thought was fucking ridiculous. I mean, I kind of get it because if part of me is sitting there thinking, okay, obviously the guy's gonna find pleasure in it. Maybe it's also just that she's a teenage girl; she has no clue. what even her own clitoris is, and it's like there's just nothing going on here.
My thinking in that scene is that they were probably up there for way longer than we saw them, because they're doing their thing and he stops for a minute to like, okay, I got to take the phone off the hook because the phone ringing is pissing me off, and then goes to finish, and that last finishing bit is like the last like 30 seconds or whatever.
Well, yeah, but this is where I think you're giving Paul a little bit too much credit.
A
First
little
of
bit
all,
too much credit.
you come into the scene, not a whole lot of motion, a lot of just kissing and moaning noises. But then you also move into the main act, and then there's still not a whole lot of movement. And what I think is going on is, for some reason, they needed to just skate around simulated sex with teenagers. So they were just like, they lay in bed together, kiss,
They're
and then.
both like 20 something, so yeah.
Well, yeah, but like inside the logic of the movie.
Yeah, in logic of the movie. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
So
it's like.
So yeah, they do the do, and then little cute scene. Linda gets Bob to go get her a beer, and that post sex beer. Bob's so excited, goes down, and this point in the movie is probably why we think Michael Myers is a freak of nature, because when Bob gets the beer, he's like, oh, there's somebody in the closet, opens up the fucking closet, and Michael one arms Bob up like 2-3 feet in the fucking air and impales him into the wall.
Yeah.
And he fucking stays there.
At this point, I'm less impressed with Michael's strength and more impressed with the, like, Japanese steel cut, iron forged knife that he's invested in order to make these kills. I mean, I want to know what professional chef is using that knife in the kitchen to cut mean slices of prime roast, because that knife is sticking in by like a thread and is still holding that 150-pound body. I mean, that's incredible.
This is also probably one of the, I think this is the kill that everybody keeps going back to. It's like, it's just so creepy, and it's like, it's scary, all that stuff. Because so Michael impales him, and Bob stays hoisted up in the air like a foot in the air and just stays on the wall. And Michael steps back and he like observes it, and he kind of like tilts his head and he looks at his work, and it's kind of weird because when Michael looks at it, he's looking at it like an art piece. Like it's very dehumanized how he's looking at it.
Yeah.
And that's another thing where it's like, it gives you another sense that Michael's not human. He's like something else. He's like something like really primal, which is another like spooky thing.
Yeah.
But then we go on and we get to see, I guess, the second set of tits in this movie.
I think so. Yeah.
Second set of tits in this movie.
Because we do see Annie's, and then this, second set.
Second set of tits in this movie. If you're, for all of those out there keeping track on your slasher movie tit charts, we're on number 2. So Michael goes up. He's in the ghost like costume. He has a sheet over his head with Bob's glasses on, and Linda's like, "Oh, see anything you like, Mr. Ghost?" And Michael obviously doesn't move or do anything, so she's like, "Okay, whatever, fuck you." And then she calls Lori to, I guess, ask where the fuck Annie is, because Annie hasn't shown up in like an hour. And then Michael strangles her with a cord. Lori's like, what the fuck's going on? Why is this weird gasping and choking noise over the phone? And that kind of leads us into Act 3, once Linda is strangled to death by Michael. And now Lori finally realizes, oh, wait, I haven't seen Annie come back to pick up Lindsay in like fucking an hour or 2.
Well, again, so this goes back to a little bit to this point I've been making throughout about what is going on with the direction, right? That's that concerning phone call is certainly enough to be like, oh, I should call the police over there because it sounds like my friend just choked on a peanut or something, and she could be dead right now.
Well, we did have the setup earlier in the movie where Linda does the same thing. She calls Lori and she's like chewing on something.
Yeah.
And so that I can give the disbelief there because it's a setup and it's a payoff later on. So maybe she's like, okay, you're doing a weird squealing noise. And it also, let's be honest, it sounds like she's getting plowed.
A little bit. And I wouldn't put it past Paul because he does suggest it's like, why not have a threesome with one of your good friends? It's more the merrier.
Uh, good on him.
As if he
But
would be able to split 1.5 seconds between two people, but
talking shit on my boy Bob. Okay, so
uh,
but as it
so
goes on,
yeah, so there's a shot where she is looking across at the house, like there's it's just basically a shot where you're supposed to watch her sit there and kind of decide, should I go over there and investigate or should I stay here? And you pulled a lot out of that I think the shot doesn't totally give without the context of what comes next.
mm,
But there's certainly at least a level to which this movie is trying to get the audience member to say, "Don't go in the house, don't go in the house." It's like, I get it, I get what it's trying to do. Um, but she does end up going across the street very slowly. We do watch her go across the entire street.
mm.
All There's no cuts. It's just we get to watch
It's
her
the
go all the way
tension buildup,
across. The
man. It's
tension
the
is building,
tension.
and Lori just
Oh,
knocks on the door, kind of checks out what's going on, and then decides to waltz right into this dark home.
also, this house looks so creepy. How
Yeah,
it's lit, where it's very dark. All the lights, kind of that weird bluish, like moonlight thing they said was nighttime in the 70s.
this was the original movie that made you scared to be walking around in the dark in your own home.
It's really off-putting because we see the house when it's lit up and it's like really nice and homey.
Yeah.
And then when the lights go out, it looks like a whole different building.
Or even when the houses are lit, they seem a little dry, and like in Laurie's room during that earlier scene, it still seems a little pale and gloomy. During scenes like, for example, when Annie spills the butter on her shirt, the lighting in the house is still fairly dark. It's still very dim. The kitchen lights are still a little dingy. I think the movie does. There's a lot of technical good things about this movie, right?
Yeah.
And the lighting is certainly one of them. Especially to be able to get all this good action in such dark exposures.
And then I think this is where Act 3 kind of comes in when Laurie she's
Yeah,
in
at
the
this
house
point
and
we
she's
are. Yeah,
investigating. And this is when we find out that Michael's made a haunted house fun house in this building.
yeah. Now he's playing with his food. Laurie goes upstairs to the scene of the crime, as we'll say, and comes to find that the body of Laurie is
Or the body of Annie is sprawled out on the master
yes,
bed
and there's a tombstone, which
for Judith Myers, which is Michael's sister from the first kill in the movie.
means that he has been off camera lugging around this tombstone.
That's another thing, okay? Because they do a scene way early on in the movie where, oh man, Michael stole his sister's tombstone. What could he be using that for? And that's a full size granite tombstone.
Yeah.
That thing's got to weigh like 400 pounds easy.
Also, one of my least favorite things when movies like mention something in dialogue at the very beginning of the movie, and then it has no bearing on the rest of the story until this one detail later in the movie. It's
That's
like,
a whole scene.
yeah, but it's just like a setup scene for this little detail
I get it.
that technically has nothing to do with our main character.
It's a good for a scare.
Yeah, it's okay for the scare.
It's an interesting
yeah.
image. I'll give you that. It's an interesting image.
It's an interesting image. Yeah, I mean
But
that's what we're coming to find out is everything.
let's
here
go.
is
But let's
for
go back on that because he has to break into the graveyard or the cemetery, lift the fucking 300 pound tombstone out the fucking earth, and carry that to a station wagon.
Yeah, I mean, I
How
think
strong is Michael?
based on that opening scene, I think we can understand that Michael's pretty damn strong because for you to just brute force break out of a mental institution, you probably have to have some muscle on you.
Yeah. The other thing is he just kind of like open palm like Ric Flair slaps a car window and just shatters that fucker.
Exactly.
Like it is Michael Superman?
He could be, and this could be his
Hmm.
revenge for
Lois Lane holding out for too long? Is that what this is?
them not publishing his articles. Maybe I don't know.
Who knows?
Um,
But yeah, so then Michael finally, Laurie freaks out. Paul comes swinging out from the closet.
I
Is that
like
what
that. That
happened?
was funny.
That was kind of weird and kind of funny. And
Kind of
then
hokey, kind of scary. Yeah.
literally like a funhouse kind of thing. And then Linda's just bunched up in the broom closet
Yeah,
or
with
the
eyes
linen closet.
crossed and all that. Oh my god.
So this is when the movie just is like, okay, fuck it, we're just gonna throw stuff out of the air and just it's gonna be funny. And then Laurie's freaking out in the corner, and then Michael slowly starts to appear in the shadows and attacks her, and she falls down the stairs. And this is like that chase and the climax and all that stuff. The killer and the final girl going at it, and Michael's just fucking horrifying because he
Oh
just
yeah,
doesn't fucking stop.
doesn't stop. He takes, let's see, a knitting needle to the eye.
A pretty fucking good sized one too. Like this is old school knitting needles. These things are like a foot long. Takes that all the way in his eye. Gets
Right.
stabbed in the chest with the butcher knife.
He takes the clothes hanger to the, I think, the eye again, right?
Yeah. Full clothes
So,
hanger to the. Oh wait, the knitting needle was to his neck. It wasn't to his eye. The
yes,
clothes
that's
hanger was
true.
to his eye.
Um,
Oh,
or I
that's
will
the
say,
worst.
resourceful of our main
Lori
character to
here.
finally actually do something a little smart. Maybe not smart as in like, let me hide in this closet, but she could have like at least jumped out and down and started running down the street. But you don't want to leave the kids. I get it. But what I
Whole
like
deal. Whole deal.
what I like is that it's not just like, oh, there happens to be a pocket knife in this closet. It's that she literally had to like be a little resourceful and decide, oh yeah, I can unravel this, and then use that as a weapon to defend myself. It's like, it's not genius by any stretch, but it's nice how we actually got something out of Lori for once. Because
It also a little bit before this when Laurie's running from Annie's house and she's like, please somebody help me, and she's banging on doors and the neighbors are like ignoring her. That's the scariest part of this movie. And that is like the realest part of this movie, and I think that's why it's so terrifying. Because it's Halloween night, girls running, she's like, help me, banging on the door, and the neighbors look out the window, see her, and just turn off the lights and just shut off the stuff and they don't help her.
yeah,
That's
I
one of
think
those things where it's just
there's like two
really
levels
weird.
to that I think are scary. On top of the fact that there's like a legitimate psychological study done on this phenomena of like a person screaming for help. If nobody steps up first to help, they will not get any help. Because there was a real life instance of something I think that went on in like the 40s, maybe as late as the 60s. I'm not really sure, in which somebody was murdered, like in the hallway of their apartment complex or in like the street below, and a bunch of people could hear the murder going on in the apartments above, but did nothing to call for help for this person.
Because they
Be-
thought like somebody else was gonna do it.
yeah, they thought either somebody else will do it, or like I can't see it. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And there's like an actual kind of phenomena that's academically studied around that. So that's actually very real. But again, still movie logic. You think one of the neighbors might be able to come out with a gun and help, but no, that's fine.
And
Um,
honestly, I think that's just like another level of scare to this movie, which is just I
yeah,
don't know, it just creeps me out.
it certainly gets you
But
concerned because, especially the other part of it, I was going to say is that Michael has no bearing on like there are other people in this neighborhood. I'm coming after you, and
yeah.
that makes it a little bit more scary once you realize there's no diversion unless I can get away. So the chase is really on at that point.
And let's get back to where we were talking about. So Lori gets in the house, she stabs Michael in the neck with a knitting needle. She pokes him in the eye with the coat hanger. She stabs him in the chest like twice with the knife.
Yeah.
And she thinks Michael's done. She gets the kids, tell them to leave, run out, go down the street, try and find somebody,
The,
call the cops,
the
just get
kids
the
running
fuck
away
out the
was
house.
just too much.
Where
That's
they're
where I
like
broke.
yelling, like, ah, please,
Yeah, just
somebody
like
leave.
the straight up fear. It's not like fear as in like run from the boogeyman. It's just kids all of a sudden run out of the house screaming as if they've just witnessed somebody like take out their balls or something. It's like I don't know. It's
But it does alert Dr. Loomis
sure, yeah.
to
Loomis
what the
happens
fuck's
to be
going on.
walking by because he had recognized the station wagon somewhere in the neighborhood.
Mm.
Um,
And this is the other part where we realize Michael Myers is in fucking invincible.
yeah,
Laurie's there, she's scared. Michael gets up and he attacks her. And that's when we get Michael's mask gets pulled off for the only time in this movie. This is the only time we see Michael's face. And he just looks like super normal. I don't know why. I think when people first see this, they're expecting him to be like kind of fucked up.
yeah. There's maybe a little expectation, and he doesn't look totally. He looks a little weird, but not like disfigured.
Because the eye thing, yeah, because he just got poked in the fucking eye.
Yeah. Um, there is a little bit of an expectation that he's supposed to look like Sloth from Goonies or whatever.
He's supposed to look not normal, and he
Yeah.
just looks really average.
But that's what kind of works about the mask is that you are left to that sort of it's left to your imagination to figure out what this maniac looks like. I almost would have preferred if they left that to the shadows a little bit.
Where
Like
we complete no face.
yeah, they kind of use the lighting to like still hide the face so that it's still the unknown face of death or whatever. But that's a little too artistic for this film.
There's a lot of artistic stuff in this movie,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I get what you mean. That's a level this movie doesn't try and go for.
Right.
Which,
they're trying to sell popcorn, not write metaphors. So, um,
and that happens. He throws Laurie down, puts his mask back on, and Loomis finally is like, "No, Michael!" and pops him in the chest like 6 times.
he unloads
with a revolver.
the clip. Yeah.
Michael falls out the second story building. It's second story of the house onto the ground. And we have this really good like back and forth with Laurie and Dr. Loomis, which is interesting because it's the first time they've shared a scene in this film, and they're the
first
two main
time
characters.
they shared a scene, and first time we get some like beefy, kind of meaty dialogue that is actually discussing what the fuck is going on.
Was that the boogeyman? As a matter of fact, it was. I love that line, those lines of dialogue. I think it sums up this movie perfectly.
Yeah, I think it does, and it's like kind of short and sweet to the point. That's literally the end of the movie. We get the iconic. We look down from the balcony, and he's gone, and then that's where we cut to black.
Yeah, which is, I know it's kind of sequel baity, but I still really really like that ending. And I think I don't like. It seems like you kind of don't like Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, but there is a thing he's doing in that scene that I think sells it really well. And that's how he's acting when he looks out the window. So he looks out the window, we see it's empty, and it cuts back to him real for a second. And when John Carpenter was directing it, he was like, so, Donald, how you're going to act this scene out is you're not going to act surprised. When you look, when we get your reaction, you're going to act like you knew Michael wasn't going to be there already. Like you already assumed, of course, he would have gotten away. Nothing can stop him.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where it just feels more, it gives him more sense that Michael isn't human. That he's more like this force of nature.
Yeah, it starts to become very apparent that Carpenter's intention is to make Michael seem as much of an urban legend as possible. And I think that works. I think that's a very good way to set up this killer because while we start with something that's super physical and real and we want to make the urban legend seem as real as possible, it's still, in order just to make it superhuman and scary for us, you have to make it seem like he's more than human, I guess.
He is something else.
Not to, reference Rob Zombie at all, but that is
Halloween. And also that the music in this movie is fantastic.
Iconic. A little repetitive. Iconic though.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's move on to our second film of the evening.
Yes.
That'll be right after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here. Okay, so you're gonna need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen.
We're back. And what are we talking about now that we're back after Halloween?
Well, now we're to the other half of our lovely little slasher feature here. We're going to be talking about Psycho.
The absolute stone cold classic that is Psycho.
Yeah, literally one of the most famous movies ever to be released upon the silver screen. This is Alfred Hitchcock's most famous film.
Which is saying something, because Hitchcock's no slouch.
No slouch, and definitely when you think about his entire library of film,
his oeuvre, as it were.
Really, this and maybe The Birds are his only brushes with horror, if you really think about it. Like, the rest are mostly thrillers, dramas.
Honestly, now that you think about it, yeah, because Vertigo's not a horror film. That's like a psychological drama.
Yeah, it's like psychological thriller. Rear Window's a thriller.
North by Northwest is a spy film. Kind of. It's a spy like adventure film.
Yeah, a little bit.
Rope is another thriller suspense film.
Right. North by Northwest is kind of I'd say that's thrillerish.
Yeah. I don't know. It's really weird when you think about it, because he's, master of suspense and master of horror, all that stuff. But he's only made like a handful of horror films that most people know.
Yeah. One about, a seedy motel in the middle of nowhere, and one about a flock of deadly birds. You get your ideas from weird places.
And it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, so David, as you said, so you never seen Psycho all the way through before?
No, I've seen the first half, and I know about Psycho. Again, this is not going to be a spoiler.
Completely blind run.
Yeah, we know what's going on here, and well, it was interesting. Again, I watched this also with my girlfriend again, so I was kind of getting fresh eyes on it. Mm-hmm. It was kind of interesting to see how it played out for her versus me knowing about it and then watching it all the way through. I think I focused, for the most part, on the technical aspects of the movie, in that its structure and the structure of the scenes, and a lot of the way I really like the cinematography in this movie, because it was, as we delve into the little bits of information that we know about these movies, made on a shoestring budget, basically almost at cost to Hitchcock himself, because he had to make a deal. Basically, Paramount apparently had no intention of wanting to be attached to this movie, and I think it was either he got it down to making it with his Hitchcock Presents television crew, which is very apparent in certain parts of this movie, or even got it down to making it with like his own private crew.
Yeah, from what I understand from this film, because I'm a sponge for movie trivia for some reason.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. He wanted to see if he can make a cheap, low budget film. I think he said in an interview for Psycho, he wanted to make a B movie, but make a very, very good B. He wanted to make the masterpiece of B movies.
Yeah.
And he could only really get his film crew together to do that from his television show. That's why a lot of this movie, it's very interesting because it's like the film looks like a TV episode from like the six. It looks like it kind of looks like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah,
in
a lot
some
of
parts.
interior dialogue scenes are definitely staged as like TV blocking versus cinema blocking, which was up to this point. The you think about the interesting other technical aspects of the movie that are in relation to that, the fact that it's black and white because of the Hays Code, the fact that
well, at this point, didn't the Hays Codes finally
no
go out, and it was just like the really like staunch kind of weird. It was like the weird in between the Hays Codes and like modern the MPAA kind of thing.
well, Hays Code didn't go out till 1968.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
shit!
It
Oh.
lasted a while into the 60s, which was surprising because of some of the films that come out in the 60s. But this was probably produced in 1959 and then released in 1960. So, it's still in the thick of it. On the back end of a lot of noir stuff. So, they had to skirt around a lot of stuff in this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of risque things that are in this movie that seem very tame by today's standards, but when this movie got released, yeah, no, there was some pushback against this film, but it didn't stop it from being a stone cold classic.
Yeah, and I will have a couple theories about this fact of like having to skate around the Hays Code and then what that produced as a result that I think work into Hitchcock's genius in producing this film. But why don't we step right into the plot of this movie to get this little baby going?
Get into this a little bit. So, first it opens, and Hitchcock has us floating through Phoenix in, I guess, the 1960s, late December, and it floats us into this random window where we meet Marion Crane and Sam Loomis in the throes of a very hot love affair. And this is like, it's kind of a long dialogue scene where it's them doing the back and forth, but it's framed very well. The actors are doing their best to make the dialogue seem snappy and quick. It's not dragging. And it sets up basically the whole premise of the movie, like Marion Crane's entire goal of the film. So Sam is just out of a pretty nasty divorce where he has to pay alimony and he's like, I can't afford another marriage. I can't afford another wife. I'm going to be paying my wife off until basically I die.
Yeah.
And Marion is like, but I love you, want to get married. And he's like, we're not financially stable enough to even attempt that. And that implants the seed in Marion's mind where if only we had a shit ton of money, we can live happily ever after in California.
Yeah.
Do you like this scene?
Yeah. This is, I think, again, when you think about like how kind of ridiculous the connecting of these two stories is on face value, right? You're connecting both this kind of like crime story where we're setting up this whole, we're committing a crime of passion because we want to be with the person we love. With a horror movie, you think they wouldn't work. It wouldn't mesh for some reason. But I do have an interesting theory about why Hitchcock did these things, and that it's not just kind of for conflict's sake, as a lot of people tend to think. I'm not going to say it now because I think that getting into the plot, again, we should have already watched it, but getting into the plot a little bit, I think, will support my point. And I'll reveal it a little later. But I again want to remind you that there's something interesting about how all these characters come together and how Hitchcock himself is not writing a plot here. He's writing a web of characters that are interacting in a very thematic way. Um, but
It is interesting, yes.
yeah, and this scene in particular sets that up with the whole. While it is pretty heavy in dialogue, yeah, I admit it's also like you said, it's staged. The actors they're in their element acting. I'd let it pass because it's also written very well. The dialogue isn't totally expositional. There's a little bit of exploring the desires and the background of the character. Um, so yeah, I
I
mean, I'd let it
yeah.
go, and it's a little, it's a little salacious. We're just after that afternoon delight, you know.
It is also interesting because this scene. I think the reason I'm kind of on this scene a little bit is the when this movie came out and how movies were made back then. They were a little bit slower,
Yeah,
and this film, like it's very watchable by today's standards. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like you're watching, the Jazz Singer or whatever, where it's paced incredibly slow and it's just so different than
yeah,
current movies. Psycho's very watchable, but this is where you'll get the first hint that, okay, this isn't a modern film. It's a little slow. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of back and forth. You're gonna kind of have to go along with the ride here. This is the pace it's setting, and I think that's where Hitchcock's getting it. Is this is the pace we're going? This is how our characters are going to talk. This is everything that's going. He sets up all the interactions that we're going to have later on in this scene,
yeah.
and
On that point, I think you're right in that this a lot of movies nowadays, the dialogue is highly expositional. It's always like action dialogue, action dialogue. Unless you're watching something that's been fairly polished and is most likely coming from like one of the more respected minds in the industry, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of like depth in those scenes. And I
well,
still think that
on
there's
that note, we can go back to Aaron Sorkin when we did Moneyball. That was a lot of dialogue. Those are very heavy dialogue scripts,
yeah, and
and
that especially is coming in a movie in which needed a lot of exposition, but is coming from also one of the probably dialogue masters of today. You know, Sorkin is known for his snappy, heavy dialogue, but that always is very calculated. Um,
hmm.
and I think there's an element to that in this, but I do think like through the next few scenes, you start to get this idea that Hitchcock is forming, as he's done in other movies, but there was still more of a classic element to the way he structured it. This movie had a lot of like the sequence versus the scene going on, where the scenes start to build off each other in more fluid ways rather than a lot of like hard cut stuff that happened in previous films.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we can harp on, Hitchcock and his use of camera and lighting and structure and all this other things in every scene because he's a master for a reason, but we should probably keep going on with this plot.
Sure.
Because right after this is where we see what Marion does, and she's like a bank teller. No, she's not a bank teller. She works at some like
It's like a real estate company, I guess, like a real estate
something.
brokerage, because the
Yeah,
money is coming from the sale of a real estate property.
yeah. And so guy comes in, rich, big Texan dude, because he has this giant 10-gallon hat. So he's balling out of his mind for 1960. And they give her like 40 grand to put in the bank. And I did do the math how much 40 grand was from 1960 and how much it is like now. And it's like a $300,000 or like $500,000.
Yeah, it's definitely enough to get this guy through escrow.
Yeah, it's enough for her to be like, yeah, I can disappear with this. Yeah, I can do this.
Yeah,
And that's what she does, and she resolves like, okay, I'm gonna steal the money, I'm gonna leave, and I'm gonna be, scot free. And because this is the '60s, you can just kind of move 2 cities over and just go by a different name, and you will never be seen and never be found.
yeah. The paper
It's
trail in the '60s was definitely, well, it was a paper trail, so it was extremely easy to forge,
disappear.
probably, and you know.
You get one fake driver's license, and you're golden, never
Exactly.
found again. Oh, yeah. My uncle actually did that. He was in the army in Texas, got shit faced on his last day, before he was to be discharged, and him and his buddy, I guess they robbed a liquor store and got into a bar fight or whatever, and they got put in jail for the night. And he was like, "Oh shit, I gotta be at base tomorrow, or I'm gonna be tried with like desertion." So he escapes the jail. How he does that, we have no idea to this day. But he moves to California right after, and like disappears for 2 years. And like the FBI can't find him until they show up on like my grandmother's doorstep to be like, "Hey, do you know this guy?" And she's like, "I don't know him by that name, but I know him." And then he gets dragged all the way back to Texas and arrested and all that stuff.
Oh, that's
Fun
fun.
fact, he was pardoned by the governor of Texas, and this is back in the 60s. They were still hanging people in Texas in the 60s. But I digress.
Were they hanging
tidbit.
people for desertion?
Hey, fuck yeah, they were. This is Texas, man. Hang people for jaywalking. You get a bottle of Jack Daniels with every purchase of a gun. Come on.
You know what they say.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
Yeah, including the death penalty.
Basically, dude. Come
on. But yeah, so we have 40,000 in cash, just cold hard cash, sitting in our main character's lap, and she decides, "I'm gonna take this and put it to use." More than this pervy Texan would ever.
Yeah, he comes off as, I think that's probably the point for Hitchcock right here. He wants Marion to seem justified in stealing this guy's money.
Yeah, I think this goes back to my point about the characters that he uses in this movie. It could have been any old man, literally, that she's taking the money from. But I don't think it's any coincidence that this guy is particularly the face of what she faces if she doesn't get married to Sam. Like, she will have to settle for an older gentleman. Most likely, it being the 60s, this was kind of the norm back then. You married older, whether that was a few years or several years, it was kind of up to chance.
You married for security.
Yeah, basically. And this guy is the ultimate picture of security in that he's more than willing to marry this hot young piece of ass, but, you know, he's the pants of the relationship, and you got to go home and be wife or else. You know, it's like, or she could be with Sam, somebody who she legitimately loves. And I kind of like that. That's how that story is set up.
And as it goes on, she steals the money. She's driving off. She sees her boss and this rich Texan dude like crossing the street, and she freaks out and she just guns it, and she's off in the desert. And this is where this comes up, I think 2 or 3 times, where it's like her voiceover in her head of then that paranoia of like, oh shit, they're probably hot on my tail. They probably know exactly what's going on. She keeps looking over her shoulder, afraid somebody's following her. And she's driving through the night, and it gets to the next morning, and she's passed out at the wheel. She's, parked on the side of the road, passed out in this middle of the desert. A cop rolls by, sees what's going on, and this cop, it's so subtle that with the camera work, but he looks like the most intimidating human being on the planet in that scene, where he's just like staring in, and he's total stoic, like blank face with those dark black sunglasses, and he's just staring into like Marion's soul.
Yeah, like suspicious upon first impression without even knowing anything.
Oh yeah. And so Marion's like, okay, cops are obviously aware of me. She ditches her car. She keeps going. There's more of the voiceover, her being guilty. And that's pretty much the first act, where it's her stealing the money, getting away, trying to outmaneuver her way with the police, until she shows up at the Bates Motel. David, the Bates Motel.
Yes, this is the beginning of the thick of the movie. This first half of which was a crime film, and then all of a sudden it's starting to get a little off-putting. We meet our hotel manager, Norman Bates, the famous one and only. He is the only guy there, and is more than willing to rent a room to Marion, who happens to be the only person probably to have visited in months, ever since they diverted the highway.
Yeah. Okay. So this has always been a thing with me in this movie, but so the Bates Motel it looks like a regular whatever, just roads, like regular motel, right?
Yeah.
Big giant Victorian house in the background with standing, but it looks like a normal hotel.
About, yeah.
And Norman says he hasn't seen anybody come in months. It's super slow. Maybe one. How much business do you think the Bates Motel gets on
Um,
a month?
I actually have a theory about this that is kind of connected to a piece of backstory later in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that in that Norman's mother had passed away months prior.
Oh, I think like 10 years prior.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what they said. Like, which is really weird because then you're trying to figure out how old Norman is. Because I want to say that's what it was. Like, she passed away like years ago.
Yeah, let me see. I want to fact check that real quick just to make sure.
Make sure I'm not talking total
10
bullshit.
years ago, yeah, murder suicide.
Yeah,
Um,
She dies 10 years ago.
okay, well, maybe my theory has no weight to it then. But my theory is that the Bates Motel is actually closed, and that the reason nobody's there is particularly due to the fact that the hotel is closed and Bates is just kind of like milling about, kind of doing his thing. Because otherwise, there's kind of like a what if that comes up with like, well, how the hell is Bates able to survive there on basically no income and the overhead of a motel on top of his own living situation at the top of the hill, and presumably a sick mother to take care of. So
I mean, actually, I don't think your theory's that crazy
yeah, there's
because
something
that
about it.
because I think that's probably a good explanation. The Bates Motel is probably actually just completely closed. Like he's probably not paying bills on it. It probably like foreclosed years ago, but like the house is probably paid off and he lives there or whatever, and he just keeps running this like deserted hotel.
Yeah, and that's
But
kind
the
of that's more of a fan theory, I guess, than my legitimate explanation to what's going on here. It could very well just be that Norman is, still taking vacancies, and then that's kind of how he keeps food on his plate and all this. But
but that was the thing that I always had a question of like watching this movie is how the hell is he paying for the hotel?
yeah, exactly.
He's also he's like 15 miles from the nearest town and it's it's literally the middle of nowhere kind of deal. But so what's he do all day? Like that's
Taxidermy, apparently, as we learn in one of the following scenes.
yeah,
Um,
let's get on with this plot, I guess.
yeah,
The
so
following scene with the taxidermy.
Marion is invited to have dinner with Norman, who then basically just watches her eat a sandwich. Um, they have a lovely little conversation, a very famous scene now, if we're talking about these dialogue scenes. They discuss Norman's taxidermy, um, Norman's living situation with his mother, which again, after watching this movie and knowing what goes on, if you have and if you haven't, shame on you. You should be watching with us. Um,
What else?
if you really think about this scene over again, it gets even more psychotic. That's what I love about this, is that this movie really pays to mind planting the seeds of like, whoa, this guy is way creepier than I thought.
And I think this also goes into the casting a little bit because Anthony Perkins,
It's perfect.
yeah, he's so okay. So let's talk about Norman as a character for a second. So Norman, surface value here, he's generally just he looks really young. He's kind of I never want to say that he's malice, like he's malicious, but he seems just so like so unsocialized. Like he doesn't talk to people for long periods of time, and he just constantly comes off as like he's 15.
Yeah, there has proclivities to be angry in conversation and heated. Particularly is obsessed with himself. Um,
Mhm.
is obsessed with comparing his own situation against others in a form of judgment. It's very interesting how deep the psyche of Norman is apparent, when you kind of break it down.
Yeah, like it's just kind of weird. And then when he gets going in this back and forth with Marion, because this is a long scene.
Yeah.
It goes on, and it reveals like basically everything about Norman you need to know. Where he's into taxidermy, he's into all these weird things where he's just super alone. And there's a line where he's talking to her, and because this is the little dinner scene where he's like, "Oh, you don't know what it's like to be in one of those institutions. I can never send my mother there. All these other things. It's those things are so dehumanizing." And I'm like, "Well, how does he know that? Was he institutionalized? Was he in a thing and then his mother took him out of it? Like, is this one of those weird like dialogue slips that give you some insight as to what he was before we saw him in this movie?"
Yeah, I think this is one of those like dialogue double speaks in which you can, if you have no idea what's going on upon first viewing this, then you're like, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, a mental hospital is kind of a cruel idea if you really care about your mother. But then upon second viewing, you're like, what the fuck is going on with Norman Bates?
This movie just gets so like creepier and weirder
Yeah.
and scarier once you give it the second viewing and you stop looking at it's like, oh, he's just a psychotic, and you start looking, it's like, oh no, he's like all the way gone.
Yeah.
Like, there is no point in this movie where he is not on edge to strangling somebody.
Yeah, he's basically an animal backed into a corner.
Yeah, which is so weird because he comes off as just so like non-assuming. Like, he just doesn't come off as like dangerous.
Yeah,
which
and
is weird.
There's also an interesting element to which you wonder, is this legitimately him? As we it's actually mentioned at the end of the movie that with the very last moments, is Norman truly just two separate personalities, or is this some sort of like Venus flytrap show that he's using to draw somebody in to fulfill this need to kill? Is there another element to this like predatory nature, kind of like we found with Michael Myers?
That's actually a good comparison there, because in Halloween, Michael is this like force of nature, just pure animal instinct kind of thing, and then Norman, that's a good way to put it. It's a Venus flytrap, where he's the friendly hotel owner. He's this nice, kind guy, tries to get people to stay in the hotel, only for Mother to act out his like fantasies or his murderous fantasies upon them. Huh.
Yeah, and I think
Weird.
that within the next few scenes, obviously we get by the end of the scene, Marion kind of makes this decision that she's going to drive back to Phoenix and return the money tomorrow. But before this, obviously, she goes back to the room and takes a shower, and this becomes one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history.
It has been parodied, it has been copied, it has been done over 1,000,000 times.
About
the shower scene.
Yeah, just as Halloween had its very iconic opening, this is the iconic kill scene that Psycho has to its name, and we get the blood and water going down the drain, and then Norman comes.
Shot with the eye.
What?
Oh, sorry, but there's that shot where it's the water and the blood swirling down the drain, and it dissolves into Marion's like eye, and there's just a lot of good filmmaking in here. There's just a lot of good like filmmaking in this movie.
Yeah, I guess to delay my point for a second because I was kind of glossing over it, but we really should not gloss over this. Like you said, the filmmaking in this scene is particularly interesting to me because of like, think of the content that you got going on here during the Hays Code. You got nudity, actual like vicious, brutal murder happening on screen. You have kind of the sexual nature of the nudity a little bit. It seems a little bit kind of
voyeuristic.
It's voyeuristic and salacious.
The whole thing where it's like it's in the bathroom, which was like, this movie actually has a first of filmmaking. It's the first time you ever see a toilet, and it's the first time you ever see a toilet flush in a film.
Really?
Yes, that's actually a really weird factoid about this movie. It's the first time you ever see a toilet in film, and it's the first time you see a toilet flush on camera.
Well, you'd think it's the fact that there's simulated nudity on screen, but no, ladies and gentlemen, the toilet is the big landmark piece of cinema history that we Get out of
Yep.
this.
There's plenty of nudity in earlier films. It's just we don't
It's very true.
talk about it that much. But yeah, but it's really weird because also how this is cut, because
Oh yeah.
you know, everybody knows how the scene kind of is edited. It's these very short, like less than a second, like probably like a couple frames each of the knife, Marion's body, the knife going up to Marion's body, but we never see impact. We actually never see a cut. We don't see where she's bleeding from. We don't see where she gets stabbed. But it's all implied and it's all quick, and the knife going up, down, and it's very brutal, it's very vicious. And we barely see anything.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things where it's, the whole your brain fills in the blanks. You just need enough information to start drawing stuff.
Yeah, it's just stringing those images together, and it is very interesting how there's that obvious the famous clip of Hitchcock explaining the I may be pronouncing it off, but is it the Kuleshov effect?
The Kuleshov effect? Yeah, I believe that's what it is. Where it's if we just oppose two images together, your brain will make the story. Man's face, then soup, or a picture of soup, and then it's like, oh, the man's hungry, kind of thing.
Yeah,
We as viewers imply our own emotions or our own thoughts into the sequence of shots.
yeah, and it's a transformative. If you're learning film, a very transformative way to learn this is to get the fact that he had to figure out a way to simulate the intensity and fear of what's going on in the scene, all without making it too intense for the viewing audience that he had to approve for the Motion Picture Association of America.
Yeah. This sequence was so close to getting cut from the film.
Oh yeah, it's so close to being like nationally panned, or that's probably not the right word to use
Well,
for it.
not even panned. Like the Motion Picture Association was gonna just cut it from the movie. It's like, you can't put this in the movie or we won't release it.
And it's literally like the most important plot point.
Yes, because that's the thing. So because that's another thing this movie did that just blew people's minds. Because we follow Marion all the way up to this point, and this is the halfway point in the movie. For those who don't know, our main character dies halfway into the movie.
Yeah.
Well, what happened? Granted, I guess now that's not really a big thing because like Scream does that, where Drew Barrymore dies in the first act, or just like dies in the first scene, and we think she's the main character. But it's so weird because if you look at 1960s films and traditional story structure and how that's like plays out, it's super jarring when you think about it.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point to the fact that this movie is technically an adaptation, right?
Yeah, it's an adaptation of a book that Hitchcock bought the rights to.
Yeah, he bought for all of $9,500, and then he bought every copy of the book to make sure nobody knew the story. And I think there's a level to which there's a novelistic aspect to this. The characters in relation to the plot. You would read that in a book and it would seem fairly normal. In fact, when you think about it in terms of a novel, it seems more of like a serial, if anything, or kind of like a pulpy style thing.
Here's the crazy thing about the book is Norman's the main character in the book.
Right.
Which I guess makes more sense, but with the film, like, I don't know how this would work if Norman was the main character.
It wouldn't, obviously.
I guess we know because of the show.
Yeah, and like, I think there's a level to which that he wanted to. I mean, he's the master of the twist. That's how he gets his kicks. Is he loves twisting things on the audience in order to get them to come to the show. And maybe that's as simple as it was, but nonetheless, I think there's something thematically interesting, worth paying attention to, with making the switch from Marion being kind of our main character to now, through this next sequence, Norman kind of becomes our main character. And then there's like a sequence closer to Act 3 in which Marion's sister becomes more more of our main character.
And it's really weird because so after Marion dies, like Norman, I don't know if we actually do get another main character after that. We just get a. It's kind of like the novel thing where we don't have a main character. We just it goes from a single main character to like an ensemble piece
A kind of, or
almost.
I think it just gets down to the point that like filmmaking isn't as binary as that too. I mean, or
Hmm.
storytelling in general isn't as binary as you need to have a main character. You could still tell a story using only like different characters and then popping between points of view as long as you do it right. And most of the time, we only use like the concept of a main character and being in their perspective throughout a story as a means of an easy vehicle. But I think there's a level to which, in order to accomplish the thematic and moral significance of the ending of this movie, you need to be able to pop between those perspectives to keep the audience on their toes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yes, because that next sequence too, after killing Marion, um, obviously we are led to believe that Norman's mother is a psycho killer who has killed this woman out of jealousy that her son is giving her attention. Um, Norman goes through this cleaning up the body and getting rid of the evidence scene.
Also, Norman's reaction to the whole situation in the scene is very much he's like scared, he's like uncomfortable, but he goes through the motions um and it's very apparent this is not his first rodeo with cleaning up
A
bodies.
little bit. I think there's a level to which you could, because that was my exactly the point I was going to make. Is like it seems like he's reacting to it in a way that would be indicative of the fact that he didn't just do something. But
Mhm.
you could certainly get a level to which there's like there's like a familiarity going on here. That's interesting because I think with most other people, if their mother had done that, they would go to the police, yada yada yada. But Norman is so in love with his mother, not romantically, so to speak, but uh, he just without thinking about it cleans up the body and attempts to get rid of a whole ass car in a
In
swamp.
the swamp, yeah.
It
Also, how many swamps are there in like fucking California?
yeah, that's also pretty interesting. I mean,
But
I guess you couldn't
we
like
digress.
burn a car in the middle of California back then, but there's something
Yeah.
like that. But
That's another thing. How many bodies do you think are in that swamp?
more
Because
more than we can count. I mean, they pull her car out of the swamp at the end of the movie, obviously, but yeah, you don't know how long the crew had to stay on scene.
yeah, because that's another thing with this is so Norman's mother died about 10 years ago and he's all this stuff and there's people who've gone missing and he's probably had other random couples and people come in and there's probably been more murders. So we have like 10 years worth. Do we have 10 years worth of bodies in there?
Could be. I mean, one of the bodies obviously is not in the swamp. But
Yeah,
you never know. You never know who's passed through Bates Motel.
it's
Um,
the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave.
exactly.
I wonder if that's the song. Yeah.
So after the cleanup scene, we flash back to Phoenix, and there's a private investigator that's been hired because of
The
um,
money disappearing.
the money
40 grand.
disappearing and Marion's disappearance by her sister,
Mhm.
who we see going into Sam's shop. Um, well, I guess it wouldn't be in Phoenix then; it would be in California,
Yeah.
um, in Bakersfield. And Sam is obviously being accused of having something to do with all of this.
It's like, hey, your girl disappeared, 40 grand. She was heading this way. You probably know where she is. Tell us now, or we'll put the screws to you, kind of thing.
And Sam obviously has no idea what's going on. So this leads our PI to believe that something fishy is going on with the girl. So he's going to get to the bottom of it.
And also, Arbogast is just a really good like approximation of every noir detective from the 60s.
Yeah, I think there's an element to which Hitchcock is like paying homage to noir with this, but to my knowledge, he hasn't made a noir film. Correct?
I mean, well, technically, you can qualify a lot of his movies as noir. I'd have to honestly, my knowledge of a lot of Hitchcock stuff is like a lot more academic than shit I've seen. I can actually look. Give me like 2 seconds. Would you call? Well, he made like The Man Who Knew Too Much, To Catch a Thief. You'd almost. I'd like to call like Strangers on a Train is kind of noir. Notorious is kind of noir. No, he's made like noir films. Yeah, no, he's made a lot of them.
But maybe there's an element to which he's calling back to something specific because I don't know a whole lot about his like pre Universal thriller days either. It's kind of the same how like Kubrick's popular stuff, but you don't know like his early work all that well.
It's one of those things where it's really easy to know Kubrick's work post 2001, but
Yeah,
no one remembers like Spartacus or The Killing.
yeah, or like those are the earliest that you can really remember, and anything before that seems kind of like he was just kind of a no name.
Mm.
But this character is obviously some sort of homage to noir. It kind of seems a little late for this type of character, but he's here and he's
He
making it
is.
happen.
And he's great because because he says he's gone through a couple of hotels looking for where she might have stayed, but he just stumbles across the Bates Motel and he starts, drilling Norman, asking, did this lady come in? What's going on? And there's a lot of like fast talk, double speak kind of thing going on where Abergast obviously knows she stopped here and Norman is acting the most suspicious person on the planet about this.
Yeah, Abergast is definitely being aggressive about the point, and I do like that point you made up about how he happens to stumble across the Bates Motel because I think there's another parallel that can be noticed about Marion and Norman and about how both of their situations leading double lives, things happen because the world is out of your control when you try to hide things.
Hmm.
I think there's an interesting thing going on there in which coincidence is playing a part in the conflict. Um, but obviously, the other interesting thing about this scene is that the PI is just trying to get a hold of the money. He isn't really suspicious of what's going on with Marion. The interesting thing I think about this scene is that there's a lot of dramatic irony going on between the characters.
Mhm.
Abergast obviously is only really there for the money, and then Norman knows really what's going on with Marion, so he thinks that the PI is just a cop who's figured out what's going on with him, and that
Mhm.
creates a lot more of a mess when you aren't really sure of the intentions of others, even though they seem malicious. Um,
It is interesting on that point because Abagast comes off as he's malicious. Like he's coming off like he's here to, you know, beat up Norman, take him away, remove him from his mother, all that stuff. And I think that's probably what's triggering Norman right now is like he thinks he's there to take him away. And what happens later to Abergast is almost like a self-defense kind of thing.
yeah, and I don't know. I think there's an interesting level to which there's a lot of like subtext going on with that, along with
Mm-hmm.
it. You everything is kind of on face value, but the thematic significance of like noticing the secrets both of them are keeping to get what they want um, is very interesting to me. But we're again building to that point later. So after Abergast is sent away the first time, um,
He calls Marion's sister Lila.
yeah,
Calls Lila in California. She's hanging out with Sam, waiting to see if Marion shows up. And he tells her, he's like, hey, I found this place, the Bates Motel. I think there's something up here. I'm going to stick around and check it out. just wanted to just keep you informed. And then after that, that's when Abergast, he goes to the house, right?
Yeah,
Because he
so
sees something.
he comes back because he was interested in talking to Norman's mother after mention of her in the first conversation, and he comes back with the idea that he's going to try and talk to Norman again, just to kind of get things straight, maybe even get to talk to the mother. And he sees her up in the window of the house, so he's like, "Great, I can head up there and maybe just see if she's home."
Hmm.
Um, so he heads up the hill and just kind of walks up into the house and is a little too quiet. You know, it's the foyer is particularly peaceful, and it's kind of off-putting to him. But he makes his way up the stairs anyways, only to find
A knife wielding person in a dress.
yeah, he's this is another kind of famous shot that we get of
Oh
Mrs.
God!
Bates coming out of the bedroom and then Abergast
Look,
falling down the stairs.
okay, we can talk how good Hitchcock is, but this is the most awkward falling down the stairs shot you could have done, right?
At the time, it was probably great, but and even now,
Bruh.
I'm a little bit impressed with the ingenuity of like figuring that out. But it's also interesting to me that we really haven't figured out like a fall yet, like or some sort of stunt fall, or like
So,
think about the physics of the way he's falling down the stairs too. Normally you would fall backward and over yourself, but instead he's been falling on his heels the whole time.
so for people who might not have seen this scene, you can look it up. It's really easy. Just look it up on YouTube. But he's going up the stairs, and the mother comes in, stabs him, and the camera goes, and it's a straight on shot of him. He has big shock face, and it doesn't look like he's falling down the stairs. It's like he's walking backwards down the
Yeah,
stairs.
it's like rear projected into the background, the camera falling quote unquote down the stairs.
And it doesn't look
It doesn't look awesome by
good.
today's standard,
Yeah.
but again,
I'd I'd hazard it doesn't look good. It wouldn't have looked good in the '60s standard.
well, you know, I mean,
But I digress.
if you're Joe Bologna Sandwich, just you know, going to see this movie in 1960, I'm sure it was fairly shocking.
Sure, sure,
It felt like
but
another set piece scared, certainly.
yeah, that's something kind of interesting about this movie because I think after that we're going into Act Three. But let's talk about the sets a little bit before we get into Act Three. So, does the Bates Motel feel like a real place?
Yes and no. The Bates Motel, like you said, yes. The Victorian House on the Hill, maybe less. I might believe it because in California, Victorian houses were actually fairly common. It's just that, you know, that was hundreds, or not hundreds, 100 years ago, and a lot of things have been built over and demolished since then. Um, you know, our generation will probably never see a lot of what was original LA.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm maybe not like that. I mean, like, did did the Bates Motel and the house look like they weren't sets? Because
no, I do feel like they were constructed particularly for this movie. I mean, this may sound stupid.
that's what we're here for, boys.
So I watched and this might get cut out of the episode. I don't know
Nah, fuck
because
it. We cut nothing
this
out.
is
What's
bordering
going
on
on?
a very stupid question. But I was watching the Universal Backlot tour today, right?
Yeah,
And I
like you do.
am again reminded of the fact that they are milking this movie in that tour, showing off the Bates Motel and then the House on the Hill, which
Have been
obviously is
for
not to
40
scale.
years. Yeah.
That's not the actual set, is it? It's a
In the
replica?
Universal Backlog? Oh, to my knowledge, it's not the original set. I think the facade is, but it was moved there. to my knowledge, I want to say because the Bates Motel in the actual film in the 1960s, that's a facade. It's not a real building.
Yeah.
Um, I want to say the motel's the same way. Like it's not real. It's a facade.
Yeah.
Every time they go inside, that's on like a set somewhere in Universal.
Yeah.
So I want to say that the facade that's standing in 2020 Universal Studios, that's the original one, but I don't know if that's exactly where it was when they filmed it.
Yeah, I
If you
mean,
get what I mean.
I also thought it was a little far-fetched that they would have just kept it there for what's going on 60
60
years.
years.
Um, but besides the point.
Yeah, but
Yeah, no, I guess if we're talking strictly about production facade versus actually using a location, no, I don't think to that point Hollywood had progressed to using location shoots in that
well,
way. I don't think
well,
locations.
I mean, not even that. Like when you look at the hotel room, when you look at the office, all that stuff, did any of it feel like it wasn't a set? Because it all, for some reason, for me, none of this movie feels like once they get into the base hotel and all that stuff, it doesn't feel right. Like everything looks artificial,
Are we
and I
talking
wonder if that was a point.
strictly interior scenes?
Yeah, interior scenes.
Then yeah, I guess like aside from maybe the hotel room itself, maybe.
I wonder
Um,
if that was intentional. I think that's what I'm getting at. Did is the reason all that like all the interiors look so artificial is that's the thing Hitchcock was going for? Like the Bates Motel surface level is artificial,
maybe it
like
had something
Norman
to do with
is.
like strictly production needs too. Like knowing what we talked about with the whole low budget, and then it's working with a TV crew, so maybe those environments were a little bit more comfortable for them.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, he most of the movies he had done to that point were done on sets, like Rear Window, completely on a soundstage.
Yeah.
Um,
Most of Vertigo was soundstage.
The Birds, soundstage.
Mhm.
Even for exterior scenes, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe there's something to that. I mean, he also came up in television, so maybe that's partially something he was more comfortable with too.
Well, he came up in like Europe in the silent era. That's where he started.
Yeah,
But he got big in TV post 1940, 50, stuff like that when he got really famous, when he got Alfred Hitchcock Presents,
yeah, that's when he
which
would
was
like
like
cut his teeth, if per se.
I guess. I mean, he was already established, but whatever. We're getting a whole history lesson at this point. Let's get on to the Act 3 and round this movie out a little bit.
Yeah, so now we kind of jump into Act 3. The PI is dead, and there's radio silence coming back to Lila in Bakersfield. So her and Sam devise a plan to go kind of check out the hotel for themselves. They're gonna get to the bottom of things. They're gonna go to the sheriff's house, which kind of
Ask him.
is an interesting scene again because this was the most TV looking set, but then also had some weird lighting going on. Especially the lighting falling on the sheriff's face, very chiaroscuro, but like, why? You know?
It's like there's no practical light that would have done that in that scene.
Yeah, or like it had to feel like anything other than like a non deliberate choice. It had to have been deliberate because
Yeah.
like it creates such a weird shadow, particular shadow on his face, nonetheless. That kind of feels like foreshadowing for some reason to me. Maybe,
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
But
Could be.
they go to the sheriff's house, and that's the big reveal that Norman's mother's been dead for 10 years, and there's somebody else is in that house, which we'll figure out in a second.
Yeah, the mystery is unraveling.
And Sam and Lila decide they're gonna go and they're gonna get to the bottom of this. They're gonna stay a night at the base motel and investigate everything for themselves.
Yeah, and now we get this fun little game of you distract the bad guy while I go check out his mother's
His
shoe
secret
closet.
lair.
Um, Sam goes to the office after checking in to divert Norman's attention and kind of get some information out of him. though it ends up being strictly an aggressive accusation scene, kind of. He just really doesn't talk to him all that much. He just starts accusing him.
Yeah, they talk for like, I don't know, 5 minutes about like the weather, and then Sam just goes straight in on like, so you killed Marion, didn't you? Huh? You bastard. Your mother's hiding up there. You do anything for the money and all this other stuff. And Norman's just like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? And then Norman finally realizes that, oh, Lila must be in the house, and they get into a scuffle. And Norman overpowers Sam, knocks him out, and runs up to the house where Lila is. And this is about the time when Lila finds Mother.
Yeah, this is the hokiest thing I've ever seen. I mean, really?
This is not the stairs. This is.
Yeah, so for me, don't get me wrong. I love it. I love it. It's a genius little twist. It's certainly demented for this era. But the reveal of like the hokey mummified skeleton in the chair, and then we spin around to see Norman prancing around in a wig.
In a wig and a dress, and he's
Yeah,
got the knife, and
it's
Sam just tackles into the ground, and
a
it's
little
over.
silly.
Okay, so for those who haven't seen this movie, spoiler alerts for a 60-year-old movie. This is literally older than my father, and it turns out Norman's the killer. He was dressing up as his mother and acting out his mother to keep her memory alive or whatever, and he stole her body from the graveyard
Yeah,
and
there's actually
preserved her.
there's like a really good explanation that comes up in the falling action scene.
Mm-hmm.
There, it's basically really Hitchcock is like, all right, for those too stupid to get it, I'm going to explain it now.
That's what this film. That's what that scene feels like. It feels like Hitchcock is like, okay, for everybody who took a piss for 20 minutes, here's your catch-up scene.
Yeah, and it's okay. I think there's a level to which there's a healthy discussion going on here, and it kind of sets up this really artistic last scene. So basically, a psychologist is explaining to. It's described as a court of sorts. They're pretty much in the station, holding Norman, who describes that Norman has multiple personalities, triggered by his mother taking a husband and her attention being diverted away from Norman.
Yeah.
Which then triggers this hyper intense need for him to like get that motherly attention back, and the only way he could do it is to stop them from being lovers. Ergo, they were poisoned 10 years ago, and now because Norman has lost his mother, he's keeping her alive in his mind as a way to keep from himself having to face the reality that she is gone forever. But I go back to that Venus flytrap thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this, like I said, there's this interesting thing going on with a lot of the characters in this movie having double lives. Norman, obviously, we have obviously found out is living a literal double life, but Marion herself living a double life in a way where she has to, she wants to go get away to California, but that will require her to literally give up everything and have to live the double life of an innocent person in order to get what she wants. I mean, Sam himself is living kind of a double life and having to get away from his past and take on this new relationship. About the only person who isn't living a double life really is Lila, who's
and that's just because we only met her the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and why I would actually advocate for her to be kind of like the pseudo main character of the movie, even though she again doesn't really come up to the halfway point, and then really doesn't start playing a role until sort of Act 3, kind of late Act 2. There's a way in which she is the most impressionistic of all the characters in deciding what's going on here, even though again there's not really a decision to be made. There's just kind of a reveal, and then that's the end. Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting how when having to create the beginning so that we don't aren't in Norman's shoes the whole time through. Hitchcock wanted to highlight the fact that, well, this person who's living the double life is literally getting this kind of serendipitous comeuppance by running into a person who is leading a very violent example of what it means to be living a double life. And then, obviously from the novel and everything else, the backstory of Norman ensues, and it creates this very salacious plot that
Yes.
wraps up in this final scene where we kind of get to see Norman going crazy inside of his holding cell.
This is like amazing because it's very subtle and it's very simple.
Very artistic for this movie too.
Yeah, we have Norman, we have Mother's voice over it. Norman's silent, and she's just paranoid that people are watching her, and she's like, sorry to turn in my son like that, but what's a mother to do when her son's a madman? They couldn't think I could have done anything. I couldn't hurt a fly. And Norman looks up at the camera, like right under his brows, and it's just super creepy. And it's such a good, like, summation of the scene where, yeah, Norman's going away, but like inside his mind, Mother is still there, and she's still violent, and she's like still ready to strike at any moment, and it's very good.
Yeah.
And that there is Psycho.
Yeah, that about sums it up. We pulled the car out of the swamp and cut to black, and that's our slasher films for the week. Very good selection of films, I think. But let's get into the kind of the nitty gritty of really figuring out what's going on with these two.
So let's before we give our compare and contrast, and we kind of debate a little bit about which we like better and which we think is better. David, we got to start here. Hitchcock, John Carpenter, the directors, the people behind the camera. So, which director did you think did a better job here?
Well, I mean, for fuck's sake, it's Alfred Hitchcock.
Fuck's sake, it's Alfred Hitchcock?
Well, this isn't a question. Listen, I even think John Carpenter would come out and say, it's like, yeah, of course, if you're going to compare me to Alfred Hitchcock, it's Alfred Hitchcock every day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting, though, because like I really love John Carpenter, and I think it's because he's one of those directors that no matter how polished he becomes later on in his career, he is always this like grindhouse kind of low budget kind of director, and it feels throughout all of his movies. There's still like that rawness to it.
Yeah.
And it's very good. Whereas Alfred Hitchcock's very polished, very clean. He knows everything what his camera does.
Yeah, one is a very... How would I put it? John Carpenter is certainly famous for being like, we're going to make it... He has a vision. We're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen no matter what. Alfred Hitchcock is kind of the same way, but in much more of a traditional auteur sense, whereas John Carpenter is much more of like bordering on commercial. Like if Steven Spielberg kind of did microdoses of crystal meth.
That's a good way to put it. John Carpenter is like the auteur who did a lot of drugs in the 60s.
Yeah, but still also wanted to sell toys.
But yeah. So honestly, it's just kind of interesting because I feel like these two. The reason I bring it up is because it feels like these two directors, their fingerprints are all over these movies.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the directors are very important parts of the production of both of these. Literally, for Psycho would not have happened if Hitchcock was not advocating for it. But then for Halloween, I mean, it was basically
Halloween was the same thing.
Halloween, yeah, it was a giant love letter. I mean, when you really think about it, with all of its inspirations.
John Carpenter had to fight tooth and nail to get funding for this movie. This was a very low budget film for 1978.
Yeah, and it did a lot, even still, while keeping the story small. But yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, it's Hitchcock every day of the week.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the movies a little bit. So, your broad overview, what did you like, what did you not like about the movies, the two movies we saw here?
Well, again, we're going into this thinking about which is the ultimate slasher. Obviously, these are the two most famous, but that also kind of brings to the forefront which is the better slasher. Um,
Hmm.
I think still hands down, if you really think about it, Halloween is the better slasher because it's more an actual slasher versus Psycho. While budgeted or billed as like a slasher movie, really isn't all that much of a slasher. It's more of
Well, it's billed as a slasher nowadays with us in hindsight of it. I
yeah,
think, which is kind of interesting because I think John Carpenter, when he set out, like, I think slashers were a genre by that point, or there's at least an idea as to what that kind of movie was. Whereas, like when Hitchcock was doing it, he was laying the groundwork, kind of thing.
yeah. If anything, it's just coming on the back of like Hitchcock's thriller work and his getting more interested in horror. For the few times that he actually approached it, and certainly trying to push the boundaries of the Hays Code and what was acceptable for an audience. And while I think that's present in a lot of horror since then, trying to push the boundaries of what the audience can stomach, it's kind of coming in a context of challenging the audience to delve deeper into the human psyche rather than just challenging the audience to keep a hold of their lunch while sitting in a theater seat.
Hmm. Well, so you're in the camp that looking at these as on topic Halloween, right?
Yeah,
If you're looking for a good slasher film, watch Halloween.
yeah. I mean, it's classic. It's hokey, but it's still good. It's still pretty scary, even though it's 1978 and it's kind of fake looking by
Hokey.
today's standards. But yeah, I think there's still some good scares in it.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah,
Halloween is where I would go for a good slasher flick any day of the week.
yeah.
But here's something that we may have glossed over, but let's talk about this a little bit. So, we know how much Halloween cost to make. Halloween cost $300,000 to make. But how much do you think it made? I'm gonna
Oh,
you hate. I know you like it when I do the budgets because that's pretty easy. But how much they make, that's where you get the hard stuff. This is your actual horror movie.
I'm gonna say over 75 million.
Over 75 million. This is 1970s numbers. All right, that's what I'm looking at right now.
Oh yeah, I'm still shooting over 75 million because of the smash success that it probably became, and especially culturally how significant it was. I'm gonna say under 100 million.
Under 100 million, you would be correct. This movie though made only 47 million. But this is 1970s and it was pure ticket sales and it was only released in America.
Yeah, I mean that's still
It,
pretty good even
we
then.
made a shit ton of money.
Um, but also by
Also,
by the day standards, I'm also several degrees of separation from that.
yeah,
Uh,
Hitchcock. I'll get this one. I'll make it easier for you. What do you think? Psycho cost to make?
Judging by the fact that if we're going by proportion, if the rights to the book for the story was only $9,500, I'm gonna say half a million.
Half a million, 500.
Yeah.
You would you would be wrong, sir.
Mm.
This movie cost $800,000.
Oh,
This movie
okay.
actually Psycho actually cost more money than Halloween.
Fair enough. I mean,
Yeah,
I certainly think there's more to Psycho's production than Halloween.
yeah. Also, Psycho made only 32 million out of its box office run.
But adjusted for inflation, that's still probably
Oh,
a
they're
hell of a
probably
lot.
compared. It's yeah, just for inflation, dude. 40 grand back then was like $500,000.
Yeah.
So
But I do think it's interesting too to think about the fact that with all that we talked about, Halloween really is like just like one, maybe not even one, just degree of separation away from like a student film.
mm, maybe I can kind of see it because it's very raw.
Yeah.
in terms of the filmmaking on display.
Pretty raw. Maybe like scenes like with the the psych ward escape, and then maybe with locking down an entire neighborhood, it might be a little much for what a student film could do. But
Actually, I don't even think they'd lock down a whole neighborhood. Now that I think about it, like what scene would they have to have done that for? Because I don't think they. Now I'm thinking about it, I don't even think they would have needed that many permits to film Halloween, because they would have needed what three houses and an empty road,
a couple public scenes, like in
maybe.
the middle of the town. Um, maybe a couple. There's a couple scenes like the one at the school, the one at the highway. Um, but you could probably pull a lot of that off somehow.
Well, something else is the most expensive person they cast in the film was, or the most expensive thing about the film was Donald Pleasance, because I think he cost like 90 grand to get in the movie.
Jeez. Okay, there, Mr. Pleasant.
Well, apparently, like he loved doing it, so he did it at cost for the rest of the movies because he's in all of them. But yeah, because I think Jamie Lee Curtis only cost like $1,000.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. I mean, she was like brand new.
She she is Marion Crane's daughter. She's Janet Leigh's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little connection there. But that is kind of interesting when you think about it. Halloween is like, I guess you can say, a step up from a student film, but maybe not that many steps up. And I think that kind of works in its favor.
A little bit. I mean, there's an element to which, like we kept saying, all of this, like having to lean on Michael Myers' physical stature, really helped make that character more scary.
Mm.
So yeah, there's a point to be made there.
So I know I can see it in your face. You feel really bad saying Halloween's the better one here.
No, well, okay. So I think ultimately, if I had to choose the better movie, obviously it's Psycho. For slasher specifically, it's Halloween. But if I'm telling you, on an off chance, you want something that's a little spooky, not spooky is not the right word for Psycho, but a little bit that you want something a little scary. You want a good movie, one of the classics. You're going with Psycho. But if you want strictly something like a slasher for Halloween's sake, you're going with Halloween. It's one of the most famous horror movies of all time. Obviously, you're going to go with it.
Honestly, even with that, I'd probably still go Halloween. This is okay. So, as a film viewer, I think you're gonna get more out of Halloween than Psycho. If you're basic film viewer, I think you're gonna like Halloween more.
Yeah.
And even as like that filmmaker, high-minded, what have you, I can acknowledge that Hitchcock does great camera work, does great story development, all this other stuff. But there's issues with Psycho that I just kind of find a little off-putting. Like, I think the acting in Psycho, though good, is very much of its time,
That's true.
and Sam, and like how Sam talks and how some of them like act and go about it, it feels kind of weird. There's some scenes in Psycho that I think don't really work. Namely the psychologist scene at the end of the film, where it just
Yeah.
kind of stops dead in its tracks for like 5 minutes to explain the plot.
It is extremely expositional. I mean, it's bordering on like sinfully expositional.
Yeah. And the kills in Psycho, though the shower scene is iconic and amazing, the staircase is it's a little hokey. Whereas like Halloween, I think all the tentpole kills are very effective, very good, and I think it plays into the fact that it knows it's kind of hokey a little bit, or
Yeah.
it plays into the fact that it knows it's low budget and it plays into it, and it's very good. It works well in that manner.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where it's like the technical aspects of Psycho are just so good that you can kind of gloss over it. Whereas Halloween, the basics are there. The characters are still likable. The acting is still serviceable across the board. Even the adults, even though they're kind of like half of a brain character, they're still serviceable for the story. And I think it still works. I would say Halloween overall is still probably the better movie.
Interesting.
but I'm a pedantic asshole, so you can argue with me all you want.
Yeah, Dean's opinions are invalid here at the Double Feature Picture Show. But we obviously can't escape the Double Feature Picture Show without doing my favorite segment every week. And that's
Deleted
deciding on
scenes.
those deleted scenes for both these movies.
We got some good ones here.
Yeah, what did you want to see out of our good friends Norman Bates and Michael Myers?
The biggest thing I wanted to see from Michael is like him sneaking steroids into the asylum and just getting swole as a motherfucker, because he has to like work out to be that fucking strong, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it would be possible, but it's kind of like with in Shawshank Redemption, how slowly over the years Tim Robbins' character had to like chisel away a hole in the wall so that he could make this grand escape out of the prison.
Yeah.
I wonder how many prisoners over the years Michael had to intimidate into shoving slowly but surely pieces of a Bowflex up their ass in order to get it into the prison, so that he
Right?
could get
Like,
that huge.
because like I know like Nick Castle probably in reality the stuntman who plays Michael, he's not actually like that giant of a human being, but Michael in character in universe just seems
He's
ridiculous. Like
massive.
how
He's
yeah.
like if we were gonna do like horror movie villains against horror movie villains in like this sort of deathmatch style, you're not putting Michael Myers up against Jason Voorhees or one of these. You're putting Michael Myers up against Godzilla of you're of that class now because of how giant he is.
Right? Like it like there has to, because you got to think about it. Like, is he just bench pressing other prisoners when Donald Pleasance isn't watching him? Because Dr. Loomis is like, oh, I've seen Michael. He just stares at the wall every day, planning his escape, getting ready. He knows every step of the way. He just doesn't move though. He's blank, vacant eyes. Does when Dr. Loomis leaves, does Michael's like, okay, he's gone, and just drops and just pumps out like 100 push-ups and
Maybe
just staring
so,
at the wall, and
because
he's like, I'm gonna get these motherfuckers. It's happening.
he seems to have that sort of spatial awareness where he could just kind of pop in and out of existence whenever he wants. So um, I don't know, or maybe it's like maybe Michael
Michael's also
Myers
doing
is one of these
chicken
people who's like
sacrifices.
really into willing things into existence. So he's just sat there and like willed himself into getting that huge.
He read The Secret, and he's like, you know what the secret is? My determination to fuck up these teenagers' night. Let's go, boys. All right.
Yeah,
So
because
what about you? What did you think of, like, what weird tidbit of fucking Halloween did you really want to see explained?
I really wanted to see explained. This actually piggybacks on this past point. What in God's name were the houses in that neighborhood handing out that Halloween that Michael Myers got so pissed off that he needed to go stab to death the chick who wouldn't take him out trick or treating? Like,
Like, what pissed off Michael to kill his sister?
yeah, like it obviously what that scene sets up when you really think about it is that he's pissed off he can't go trick or treating. So what was he missing out on? I mean, like, was it just unlimited Reese's cups for the whole block? Like, what was going on, dude?
That is the weirdest motive you could have possibly come up with. Because I know, like, the sequels, they're like, oh, Michael, he did it because he's some cult baby or whatever. But, like, he's like, no, I want my fucking Reese's cups. And that bitch wouldn't hold my hand across the street. I'm gonna fuck her up. I'm
Yeah,
gonna ruin
I
her
mean,
whole night.
cult
I'm gonna
baby my
ruin this
ass,
bitch's
dude.
career.
What we get at the end of that scene is a kid in a clown costume who had just stabbed his sister and is obviously affected by it. So really what I think was going on is the kid was trying to be mad at his sister and take out his aggression, and we took too many right turns and we made a left instead of a right, and now we're left with blood on our hands instead of sweet milk chocolate.
Yes. Guys, everyone, Michael Myers, the motive, the reason we have 10 sequels is because his sister didn't get him his fucking Milky Ways.
Sibling
Guys,
rivalry really goes to that length. I mean, you know, you think about all the
I,
fights you have with your siblings, and they can get that violent really quick.
yeah, I'm in. That is my headcanon now.
Yeah.
Forever and for always. Michael Myers wanted his fucking milk chocolate.
Yeah, and alternatively for Psycho, I'm going to make this really quick. I just kind of want to see what it would look like for Norman Bates to try and breastfeed himself.
What the fuck?
I mean, if you're going to get that twisted and really get into the mind of like what's going on with Norman, if he's already dressing up like if he's dressing up like his dead mother, he has some sort of mommy fetish that is unhealthy as shit.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to envision Norman fucking Bates doing some weird fucking like yoga shit every morning.
Yeah, he's grabbing that tit
into the position to breastfeed himself.
He's grabbing his tit like a Big Mac, trying to get that sweet, sweet mother's milk. And that is what Alfred Hitchcock is in heaven, looking down on me, an aspiring filmmaker, and placing a curse on my head for even saying that out loud. But that's how I feel.
Oh God! What the what? You got? Do you need to talk? Are you okay?
Listen, you wanted to know my deleted scenes. That's what I've been thinking about. We can't just scratch the surface of this deranged, guy who's killed his mother and is now wearing her like some sort of eternal Halloween costume, so to speak, and not really get into the nitty gritty of what's going on in the Bates household.
I just wanted to see what Norman does every day.
Like, well, we know he's trying.
Dust off his mom.
He's trying to bend over backwards to get to his own memory glands. I can't continue to do this. Yeah. Did you have any ideas? I mean, what did you come up with?
Well, my thing was I just wanted to see what Norman did on a daily basis. Did he wake up, go into his mom's room, dust her off like a piece of furniture, and then did he go through a whole thing where his internal mom voice yelled at him for not cleaning up his room and grounded him? Did Norman get grounded by himself in his own internal monologue?
You think, on the subject of her being a piece of furniture, you think Norman had some sort of like instruction manual he had to jot down in order to figure out how to put it together like a piece of IKEA furniture?
like he pulls her ass out of the fucking ground and he's like, okay, so I can stuff birds, but I'm now gonna stuff my mother. There's some Freudian shit going on there. And like, so, because she did probably fall apart in places after like 10 years. So there's Did Norman stuff and drill his mother to keep her together?
I mean, the world may never know.
These movies got some weird sex shit in them.
Yeah, well, that's horror movies for you. What is a horror movie without weird sex shit?
Fucking damn true. Damn true. But on that note, let's wrap this up before we get put on a watch list.
Yeah, it's getting weird. Thank you all for listening to this completely academic and totally legitimate podcast. We greatly appreciate your support. And Dean, tell them where they can support us and follow along with us.
So the best place you can support us is just by listening, sharing us around. We're trying to reach a few more people, even those viewers in Ireland and Russia. We checked our analytics. We know you exist. But yeah, you can find us on our Instagram page, doublefeature_podcast. You can find us on our YouTube channel run by David. David, what's our YouTube channel?
Our YouTube channel is In the Frame with a few videos coming out soon. Keep an eye out.
Yep. Well, hopefully we'll have a few video essays, a couple of maybe list videos, maybe even just ranting. But it'll be a lot it'll be a lot better edited than this. As you can see, I stumble over everything. Other than that, you can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and our sponsor of today's video, Anchor.fm, where you can go there, make your own podcast, and hopefully it works out as well as ours, or even better. We wish you the best.
Yeah, probably
Other
better.
than that, probably better. we just talked about some weird sex shit for the last, 10 minutes of this, so...
Yeah.
But, David, what are we going to watch next week?
Well, Dean, next week we got another installment of Halloween films for our lovely little month of October. We're going to be touching Lovecraft, and we're going to be going over Reanimator and Color Out of Space.
I am a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft and all those spooky, weird sci-fi stories, and I cannot wait to dive into these because Reanimator is the best kind of 80s B movie, and the new Color Out of Space film has Nick Cage in it, so I'm excited.
Yeah, this is going to be a good pair to go over our existential crisis episode of the podcast, and until then,
Watch along and get ready to talk about it next week on the Double Feature Picture Show.
yes. Dean, I'll see you later.
See you later. Don't get weird fucking mammary glands in your mouth. Peace.
I won't make any promises. Peace.